Okay, thank you very much and welcome back for those of you in the room here, but also for those of you that are watching online. We had a very interesting fourth panel, and now after this short break, we're going to dive into the second panel, which is going to focus on intersectionality. And the person that is going to moderate this panel is none other than Petra Stinen, a colleague of mine. Petra has been absolutely amazing in the work against racism in so many different ways and inspiring in so many different ways. And Petra mentioned something earlier today that I think is extremely important. You talked about the silence of the middle and the voice of reason. And in my opinion, you are one of those that have this voice of reason that I think is extremely relevant in the work that we do. So please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mamadou. And it's great to have you all here with us in the room, to see people in person. And of course, really wonderful to have all the people online with us as well. Some of us just had an amazing lunch. So to wake you up and to make you feel what we're discussing again, I would very much like to quote the great American author, Toni Morrison, about what she says about racism. And I quote, the very serious function of racism is distraction. It keeps you from doing your work. It keeps you explaining over and over again your reason for being. Somebody says you have no language, so you spend 20 years proving that you do. Somebody says your head isn't shaped properly, so you have scientists working on the fact that it is. Someone says that you have no art, so you dredge that up. Somebody says you have no kingdoms, so you dredge that up. None of that is necessary. There will always be one more thing. End of quote. And you can feel it. This quote tells you the heaviness of racism. And I think what we're discussing in the session now is this intersection between all the layers of our personality, of our identity. Like the great author, the Lebanese French author Amin Malouf once said, les identités meurtrières, murderous identities. When we focus on one layer of the identity of a person, we shouldn't be surprised if this person and put this layer in front of everything, either religion, race, gender, nationality. And I also started with this quote, Mr. Chair, because I think literature can help us, science can help us, culture can help us, and we have a great group of speakers who will enlighten us, and hopefully, as we did in the previous session, and I hope I will be as concise as Petra was on this. You put a challenge on the table to also have good recommendations in the end, so I will take note. Because we not only want to look at what is racism, what is an intersectional approach, but we also want to have ideas, solutions to go move forward. One last thing, a very good friend of mine, Naida Aurangzeb, Dutch Pakistani, wrote 2 books recently. One was called 365 Days Dutch. And it was about these microaggressions she gets every single day because of her name, because of her religion. Oh, you speak Dutch so fluently, how come? Where are you from? You know these questions? And then she wrote another book. Hey, lekker ding. Hey, gorgeous. 365 Days Woman. About the microaggressions women get. And I think this is what one layer of intersection, gender and race, but I'm sure that we will look at other layers of intersection as well. I have spoken enough. We are going to the first speaker, and I hope Mrs. Mora is online with us. I would like to call Mrs. Michaela Moa from the European Union of Anti-Racism. She's the coordinator there, to be with us in screen. Has she asked for the floor, Giorgio?
Not yet. No.
Not yet. Shall I go to the next speaker?
Oh, wait a second. Yes, perfect. She has the floor.
She has the floor? So she needs some time to connect. For the speakers in the room, but also for the speakers with us online, I don't have the red card Petra had, but she will give it to me while Michaela will start. But please take about 7 to 8 minutes, and I will make a wave that you have to end about, because we have 10 minutes for each speaker, so we have enough time for Q&A. Michaela, it seems that you're en route. It's wonderful to have you with us. Please take the floor.
Yes. Can you hear me?
Audio is not good.
The audio is not good, Michaela, so maybe you should put on. I am immediately using first name. I hope that's okay. We're a group of friends here. The friends of the No Hate Parliamentary Alliance. It's not working yet.
Is it better with without my?
Yes.
Yes, perfect. So first of all, I want to apologize. I'm in my car. Things happened. I lost my keys. I can't get into my office, but this subject matter we're discussing today is so important that it really doesn't matter where we are. I wanted to, of course, make my intervention regardless. So I will go right ahead and jump into it. Thank you, first of all, so much for having me. I would like to thank the Council of Europe Committee on Equality and Non-Discrimination and the No Hate Parliamentary Alliance for organizing this event today and for having me. And indeed, my name is Michaela and I'm the recently appointed EU Anti-Racism Coordinator. I started in May, and of course, with racial inequalities and discrimination persisting in Europe and beyond, in September 2020, the European Commission adopted an ambitious EU Anti-Racism Action Plan. And this action plan came about in the aftershock of the murder of George Floyd in the US at the hands of law enforcement, which of course led to the Black Lives Matter movement becoming a global human rights movement, landing also on the shores of Europe. It sets out a series of measures in the course of 5 years, which cover comprehensive and horizontal range of policy areas with the aim of mainstreaming anti-racism into all EU policies. One of the main building blocks of the EU Anti-Racism Action Plan is the recognition of the structural dimension of racism and discrimination. Structural racism is discriminatory behaviors which can be embedded in social, financial, and political institutions, impacting on the levers of power and on policymaking. And it perpetuates the barriers placed in the way of citizens solely due to their racial or ethnic origin. Racism is often deeply embedded in our societies, history, intertwined with its cultural roots and norms. It can be reflected in the way society functions, how power is distributed, and how citizens interact with the state and public services. It can be unconscious and often felt through a failure to reflect the interest of the people affected by racism, even if not necessarily a direct attempt to exclude. Everyday people affected by racism can feel its impact in their access to jobs, healthcare, housing, financing, or education, as well as cases of violence. As the impact of structural racism is the most profound and harmful form of racism, its existence needs to be acknowledged, and it must be addressed through proactive policies. It needs to be addressed at all levels of governance through different measures and with an intersectional approach. The intersectionality perspective is built on the premise that inequities are never the result of a single distinct factor. Rather, they are the outcome of intersections of different social locations, power relations, and experiences. An intersectional perspective deepens the understanding of structural racism and makes responses more effective. A second building block of the Anti-Racism Action Plan is clearly acknowledging different forms of racism. For example, anti-Black racism, anti-Gypsyism, anti-Semitism, and anti-Asian racism that link to religion or belief in cases such as anti-Muslim hatred. All share the reality that the value of a person is undermined by stereotypes based on prejudice. In addition to religion or belief, racism can also be combined with discrimination and hatred on other grounds, including gender, sexual orientation, age, and disability, or against migrants. This is taken into account in the action plan through an intersectional-based policy approach. This is why the EU Anti-Racism Action Plan includes not only legislative measures, and measures addressing social attitudes, stereotypes, or economic concerns, but also a strong emphasis on the collection of substantial equality data. In effect, the European Commission strongly encourages member states to develop and adopt national action plans against racism and racial discrimination in 2022, with close involvement not only with civil society, but also equality bodies. In February 2018, the EU High-Level Group on Non-Discrimination, Equality and Diversity set up a subgroup on equality data. And to help member states improve the collection and use of equality data, the subgroup made up of experts all over Europe dealing with non-discrimination policies, national statistical institutes, and equality bodies. And this subgroup provides an important forum for member states and EU institutions to discuss challenges and opportunities in improving the collection and use of equality data. At the beginning, it was made up of a handful of member states, but it has grown to become a cohesive group of 23 countries. Building also on the Fundamental Rights Agency's wide-ranging expertise, the subgroup produced a number of key policy documents to step up the collection of equality data. And in 2018, the subgroup developed a set of non-binding guidelines on how to improve the collection and use of equality data, and also has compiled practices implemented at national level and developed a diagnostic tool with which to assess the availability of quality and equality data at the national level. In 2020, the mandate of the subgroup was prolonged until 2025, and to support the European Commission's efforts toward a consistent approach on equality data collection. To achieve this goal, the subgroup has actually developed some guidelines that were just recently published on how on collecting equality data desegregated by racial or ethnic origin. And the Commission is fully committed to step up the collection of equality data and is encouraging member states to move towards a harmonized approach to data collection to advance towards a more equal society. The Anti-Racism Action Plan in particular sets out a series of concrete measures to get the data, the right data for informed and evidence-based policy choices. We know that without data, we cannot assess the true state of play of equality. And sorry, just checking the time, but I still have a few minutes. I won't take long. We know that the equality data plays an important role in informing policymakers on the state of play of equality. And there's still a lack of comparable and regular data collection on equality and non-discrimination, and this prevents us from reaching out to the most vulnerable in society. Data are crucial to understand the reality of people suffering from discrimination all over the EU, to assess their needs and address them effectively. And these data need to be comparable, comprehensive, reliable, and regular to truly inform evidence-based policy and decision-making. This will ensure that policy translates into true change on the ground, an EU where all people, regardless of their richness in diversity, have the opportunity to live lives free from racism, discrimination, and hate. I'll stop here, but I'm really looking forward to continuing the conversation during our discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Michaela Moa from the European Union Anti-Racism. She is the Anti-Racism Coordinator. I have already one question for clarification. I think at least that pops up in my mind when we're discussing data. How do we deal with all the privacy regulations that prohibit us perhaps from collecting these type of data that you are mentioning? Can you hear me? I think I have to repeat my question. Yes, so I will repeat my question, and then I think to speak to you have to take off your microphone again. So thank you very much, Michaela, for this this introduction. And you're talking about the importance of data collection, also to have an intersectional approach to all of these different layers of racism. So how do we deal with privacy regulations and also, I would say, sometimes the excuse of privacy regulations that prohibit us from collecting these kind of data that you're looking for. We can't hear you. I think you have to take off your microphone.
Thank you. Very good question. We actually just recently, some 3 weeks ago, held a roundtable on equality data, a high-level roundtable on equality data, where these guidelines that I was just mentioning that support member states on the collection of equality data desegregated by racial or ethnic origin were also launched. And this roundtable, one of the reasons behind it was exactly to bust some of these myths around equality data collection, desegregated equality data. These arguments that we typically get that it is not possible, it's unconstitutional, etc. But however, it actually is it's absolutely possible to collect equality data desegregated by racial or ethnic origin, as long as you, of course, stick to certain data protection regulation and anonymize the information and have these safeguards in place to where it is not possible to misuse this sensitive data. But these guidelines that I mentioned actually have a step-by-step instructions on how this can and should be done. Of course, always having to ensure that these data protection legislation is taken into account, but it is absolutely possible.
I don't know whether you can hear me, but maybe not. But thank you very much, Michaela. Please stay with us, and I hope that you'll find your keys. Yeah, it's almost metaphorical, huh? How to find the key to an intersectional approach. Thank you very much for being with us. We're going to our next speaker. I think we're going to Sweden. We will now meet Mr. Lars Arrhenius, who is the Equality Ombudsman. And Lars, if I can ask you to ask for the floor, I think you already did. So as Georgia will give you the floor. And again, for you as well, take 7-8 minutes, and I will flag you if you are too long. The floor is you, Lars.
Thank you very much. And let me start by thanking the No Hate Parliamentary Alliance for the important work you are doing and for arranging this conference together with the Swedish Parliament on such an important topic as non-discrimination. I'm going to speak to you about combating discrimination, and more specifically on discrimination based on ethnicity. I took up office as Equality Ombudsman in December last year, and I have since then seen several examples of severe discrimination in the Swedish society and how individuals are affected by it. As Ombudsman, I regularly meet and exchange experience and knowledge with organizations in civil society and people affected by discrimination. And let me underline the importance of civil society to achieve change. I have got a more in-depth understanding of the widespread and far-reaching consequences of discrimination for individuals. And I personally believe that discrimination is not only devastating for the individual who has been discriminated against, but also for the society as a whole. For these reasons, society should not accept, allow, or tolerate discrimination. Allow me to share with you some examples of discrimination based on ethnicity that we are encountering in Sweden. Let me start with discrimination and racism in the healthcare sector. Recent media attention in Sweden has shed light on discrimination and racism in the healthcare sector. Most recently, the media has highlighted that some healthcare providers are accommodating individual patients' requests for medical doctors with a certain ethnic origin. The Equality Ombudsman therefore invited all regions in their capacity as employers to discuss discrimination issues and how to promote equal rights and opportunities in the healthcare sector. A first meeting was held a few weeks ago. The Ombudsman also recently secured a win in an important case concerning discrimination in healthcare. The ruling followed a 6-day trial, and I think that was, to this date, one of the largest discrimination cases ever in Sweden. And in a decision delivered in May this year, the court held that the regional healthcare provider had discriminated a Muslim man of Sudanese origin for reasons related to his ethnicity. The discrimination occurred when the man, himself a medical doctor, suddenly collapsed in his home as a result of what was later to be determined to be a hemorrhage of the brain. Ambulance was called to the site. However, the responsible ambulance nurse did not consider the man to be in critical need of emergency care. Instead, and as it appears from the nurse's notes in the journal, the nurse determined the man to be awake and alert, and that he was only faking unconsciousness. In the journal, the nurse also noted cultural fainting. Since the man's symptoms were not taken seriously, he was given a low priority in the emergency room and had to wait 90 minutes to be examined by a doctor. The man sustained serious brain injuries, never recovered, and died a month later. In its decision, the court decided that this, of course, discrimination was of very serious nature. This court decision is a clear example of how discrimination can risk a patient's life, and I hope this case will contribute to increase healthcare providers' engagement and actions to combat discrimination. Needless to say, no one should have to worry about whether they would be given less treatment based on their looks, ethnic origin, or religious belief. I will now move on to share some examples on discrimination in the housing market in Sweden. The first example involved a settlement on behalf of a person perceived to be a Roma woman. She had signed the contract, paid a deposit, and received the keys. The next day, the landlord canceled the contract, the reason being that the neighbors did not want her to live there due to her Roma background. The settlement was for €5,000. Another example is a court decision in a case concerning a Roma man who applied for a vacant apartment. The man had called the landlord and announced that he wanted to rent the apartment. At the same time, the man informed the landlord that he was studying and had payment remarks, but that his step-parents could go on bail. When the man met the landlord, he was asked if he was a gypsy. The man was later refused to rent the apartment. The district court acquitted the landlord, but the ombudsman appealed against the decision, and the Court of Appeal changed the district court decision and decided that the man had been subjected to ethnic discrimination and sentenced the landlord to pay the man damages of €4,000. Since I took up office, I have taken steps to reinforce the focus on placing the individual who has been discriminated against at the center of our work. I believe that securing redress for the individual does not only support the individual, but also influence structures in organizations and society. However, to tackle the complexity of discrimination and equality issues, we will need to work in the long term and use all the different tools in our toolbox. Therefore, the Ombudsman does not only work with individual cases, but also on identified problems that are linked to discrimination and high-risk areas where discrimination may occur by focusing on priority areas. Focusing on priority areas means that the Ombudsman has addressed identified problems with discrimination within these 3 areas of society with coordinated efforts and measures. It also means that the Ombudsman makes a long-term commitment to work against discrimination in these areas with a combination of enforcement and promotion powers. Since 2017, the priority areas are discrimination in working life, the housing market, and in social services. The Ombudsman's activities in the area of working life aims to get employers to carry out effective prevention and promotion work against discrimination, and in other ways work for equal rights and opportunities. Our activities concerning discrimination in the housing market aims to contribute to increase the transparency and predictability of landlords and housing companies' queuing system, as well as to eliminate discriminatory rental criteria and to ensure the rental criteria are not applied in a discriminatory manner. Our activities concerning the social services focus on the routines and working methods of the social services work with children and young people. One key issue is that the investigations carried out by the social services shall not be discriminatory and that the investigations consistently is based on individual assessments. Finally, I would like to end with emphasizing the need for a strong anti-discrimination legislation on the EU level, as well as equality bodies that are equipped with capacity, resources, and combination of robust litigation and promotion powers. The expected EU legislative proposal on standards for equality bodies is therefore an essential initiative, and we hope to see strong and clear language that confirms the important role the equality bodies has when it comes to implementation of non-discrimination and equality in Europe. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Lars Arrhenius, the Equality Ombudsman from Sweden. I have also a clarification question for you, and I have another question, but I'll keep that for later for the Q&A. What is the role of the your role as an ombudsman? How do your findings come to members of parliament? Do you see that they use your findings in the way they make legislation?
I hope so. It's a difficult answer for me right now. I'm not I don't know about that, in fact, but I have to come back to that. Yeah, I hope they do. Yeah.
Well, I know that I'm sorry for interrupting you. You go ahead.
No, we are also engaged in the equity ombudsman, Equinet ombudsman, the organization, and we try to lift of course, our cases there also.
Yeah. I know from the Netherlands that the Netherlands ombudsman sometimes is very frustrated that reports have been written about inequality and also intersectional inequalities, and well, they don't end up in a drawer, but they also don't end up at the top of the pile of journalists and members of parliament. So maybe that could be a recommendation there, because all the wonderful work you're doing in signaling all these inequalities could be used, I think, for legislation. Well, for now, we leave it at this, and we'll see you back later. Please stay with us, and we'll go to the room, because my dear friend Fouad from Belgium, Mr. Benchika, who is a member of the Belgian Senate, he's also a member of the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe, General Rapporteur on the rights of lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and intersex people. You're perfectly equipped to have to share with us your observations on the importance of an intersectional approach of racism. Please, the floor is yours, Fouad. And the same with you, I mean, after 7-8 minutes.
Thank you, Petra. Thank you for inviting me. Thank you, Malcolm, for all your work. I really mean it. You're doing a really great job. So, when we are discussing intersectionality, primarily we need to increase the general awareness that people can be discriminated against based on different grounds. By example, a Black lesbian woman who lives in poverty, or a young gay man of color in a wheelchair. These intersections may seem abstract to some, but it's the reality of many citizens in our society. Recognizing this intersectionality has to go hand in hand with specific approach. It especially requires policymaking to be well aimed with intersectionality thinking, but mostly it's important that we are putting intersectionality into practice. From a juridical point of view, fortunately in several member states, incitement to discrimination, hate or violence and hate crime is forbidden. Aggravating circumstances are also provided for when one of the motives behind an offense or crime is hate, contempt or hostile towards a person based on their origin, sexual orientation, disability, or any other protected criteria. And an intersectional approach should be implemented in a criminal code, as it currently doesn't take into account discrimination based on different grounds. When you are talking about education, an intersectional approach in schools can be put into practice by forming allies within school context. Our society are only growing to be more diverse, and unfortunately also mean that people who differ from the norm will be more prone to discrimination. Finding allies create solidarity with people who are discriminated against based on different grounds. But at the same time, it's also celebrate diversity within the diversity. Finding allies, creating solidarity with people who are discriminated against based on different grounds is really important to acknowledge. Schools, I think, are really the perfect place for socializing and the spot to experiment with our different society. Policymaking should stimulate forming allies within classes and school culture. Just to give you a really concrete example, I think most of you know the privilege walk. I have been working as a youth worker, and every time that I was using the privilege walk, you see a whole other kind of dynamic that created within the group of youngsters. And it was a dynamic of knowing, acknowledging the pain of each other, and to know and to realize that we share so much that we even not knowing. So it's really important to know that we share a lot with each other, we share a lot of pain with each other. And from the moment that we see that, we can be an ally and we can play a role as a bystander. When you're talking about job and house hunting markets, certain tools need to be in place to deal with racism and discrimination in the job and house market. Different cities in Belgium already implemented the concept of field test. Fictitious applications are used to check whether employers or landlords are guilty of discriminatory practice. Unfortunately, it's already difficult to retrace if somebody is discriminated against in a job and housing market, let alone defining the exact grounds of discrimination with an intersectional lens. Just to give you an example, one of those moments in my life that I really felt that I was living on different intersections. Just a few years ago, the train conductor asked my ticket, and apparently I made a mistake with a date. And his response to that was, "It's always the same with your kind of people." And I asked him, "What kind of people? Me as a people of color, or me as a gay man?" He didn't reply, of course, and he walked away. But I realized that for some, there is really a big challenge to be aware and to tackle all this kind of microaggression that we already talked about just a few moments ago, and to have this kind of strategies for yourself to be able to be more than what someone reduces you to. When we're talking about media, they have a really big part in how we see each other. The media still use a very binary approach, not only gender-wise, but everything that deviates from the binary norm is seen as unusual. If you are gay and of color, you will treat it as a kind of special. When it's coming out day or Idaho day, I get a lot of journalists asking me to tell my story as a gay man and as a Muslim. I did it in the past few times, but I'm not doing it anymore because you feel every time the same frame, and it's one of trying to problematic this kind of narratives. And I'm really believing that we need more positive stories to be sure that others can be inspired. Living on different intersectionality is a power, and it is not a danger or it's not a threat. It's not something that you need to be ashamed of. It's something that you need to be proud of. So the media plays an important role in sharing the stories, but it is only possible if the teams of editors and diverse as well emphasize the importance of presenting those stories in society. When you're talking about social service, I think in the Netherlands we have the toeslagaffaire. I think it's a great example how institutional racism is working hardly on those who are really affected by it. Just to give you an example of my own, when I was 18, that was my time. Okay, I'm almost done. When I was 18, I was kicked out. After my coming out, I became homeless. I went to the social service that would normally provide me with housing and to make sure that it wasn't homeless anymore. They had one condition: you're still studying, so you need to be sure that you go into court and force your parents to take care of yourself. You can imagine at that moment, I'm 18, I just left home in a really kind of hard condition, and the only way to make sure that I wasn't homeless was to drag my mother to the court. There was a big loyalty conflict within me, and I asked them, do you really realize what it means to me? So social services needs to be more culture sensitive and needs to believe when their clients are really saying, this is where I can go and this is not possible for me. When you are talking about politics, there is no reason to deny it. In our own plenary session, but also in our parliaments, the group of parliamentarians is too homogeneous. Not many people of color have a seat at the table, and in general, those at the table all share mostly similar backgrounds. As a political parties, it's our duty to bring these intersectional narratives and perspectives to our parliaments. We need to make politics more accessible to a diverse crowd and give them the space to share their experience, but also validate it. It's only by having representation in our parliament that we can create intersectional policies. I still remember Malcolm's speech on the report of ethnic profiling and how he was held back by airport security while his colleague weren't. Even as a well-established MP in a powerful position, you are still faced with discrimination. I can recall the times that I have been stopped by military police at the entrance of the Senate. The first time I thought I was not wearing my badge. The second time I was wearing my badge. I took even my coat out. The third time I was fed up. I called the head of the military police and it stopped. Throughout my political career and my personal life, I have faced racism and discrimination frequently, online and offline. Most of people who are living of different intersections do not know on what ground they are discriminated. And therefore, it's really important that those who are witnessing an act of discrimination, of racism, to stand up, to be that ally, to be that bystander that make the change. So I want to thank you. I want to thank you very much for this opportunity, but let's not forget, what you not see, you cannot become. Thank you.
Thank you, Farad. And over lunch, going to lunch, some of us had a discussion about sharing personal experiences in a political environment. And I'm very grateful. I know that sometimes people of color, people who are on this intersection of racism, have to do all the emotional labor. And the bystander is like, tell me more, which can become very painful. So I appreciate that you share your stories and that others in this room have done this as well. Yesterday at dinner, we shared also some personal stories, and I think all of us are parliamentarians. And I think where Michelle and Barack Obama have always been inspirational to me is that they had this sort of 3 steps. I have experienced this as a community worker in Chicago. Therefore, I think that you and I together will be able to make the community a better place. So the I touches you, so we, it's the Ubuntu. I exist because you exist. And I think the challenge for us as politicians is how can we make this philosophy of interconnection into law that protects people. But I'm really grateful for your work and all of this. And I always felt that you are an amazing ally in the gender equality file. So you consider we can work together on this one. Thank you very much, Farad. We have one last speaker, also from Sweden. Is she already online? Professor Irene Marulina.
she's requested the floor.
Okay, wonderful. Professor Irene Marulina is working at the Center for Multidisciplinary Studies on Racism in Uppsala University, Sweden. Irene, we haven't met each other yet, but I'm Dutch, and we always are on first name basis. But Professor Molina, the floor is yours. And again, I also told the other participants take about 7-8 minutes, and then we'll see whether that's enough time. And we'll come back to you for question and answers as well. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much. And thank you so much for inviting me. Thank you in particular, Malcolm, because I know you from earlier, and I agree in the earlier words by Ben that I really admire your work. I really appreciate this occasion for talking about intersectionality in the struggles against racism, which is a really important issue. I would start by saying that what is intersectionality, I would like to say a couple of words about. As we see it in the research arena, we see that intersectionality is a theoretical approach that attempts to understand, and this is very important, and explain the interrelated structures of power and their systems of oppression. And when we say that, we focus on particularly 3 systems of oppression, but even other are involved, which are racism, sexism, or patriarchy and capitalism. So this theoretical approach is also important to find the common mechanisms behind uneven race, gender, and sexuality and class relations, among other social power relations. And last but not least, it functions, intersectionality functions as a weapon, a very effective weapon to fight racism and generate socio-political change. It is in that perspective I am approaching intersectionality as a facilitator for socio-political change against towards a more equal society. And I think it's important also in that sense address the idea of the definition of what racism is. Michaela had a wonderful definition.
We are losing you, so maybe you can reconnect or ask for the floor again if you can hear us.
Of racism, in which we say that it is a technology. We want to see it as a technology. A technology is something that is generating a product, something. It doesn't need to be a material product, but a social product. Is a technology then distributing privilege, exclusion, exploitation, and most important of all, and I think Michaela said it also, and Lars Arrhenius also, distributing death. And this technology distributing exclusion, privilege, exploitation, and death is based on ideologies on different supremacies. And those are, of course, the ones we know on racism, sexism, patriarchy, and heteronormativity, functionality, among others. I think Ben was referring to that perfectly, wonderfully. And what is important is that this system, that this technology is sustaining biopolitics. I mean, we are talking about biopolitics because we are talking also about societies that have a big gap between what they say they want to do and what they in fact are doing. So if we have a set of societies in the global context of today that say that they want to counteract racism and struggle against racism, but in practice are actually reproducing racism, what I think we need to do is look at politics in terms of in what sense or to what extent those politics are racist biopolitics. And of course, sustaining also media and other dominating discourses are sustaining these systems or these technologies of racism. And I think Ben also said it very clearly, the importance of media, the role of media, which I would call the discrimination by word, by the language, by the speech, by speech. Okay, I would like to complete with one example to what Lars very wonderfully said about how we should understand discrimination, and presented a couple of examples, and was talking about discrimination in the healthcare system, which is a huge problem that we are trying to clarify more and more through research as well. I would just say that to complete that picture is just to look at the figures that we have today around Europe, in the United States and everywhere, showing how COVID-19 has been hitting different groups differently. And we know from all these cases that the racialized population, and in particular in the European societies, the migrant population, racialized and stigmatized, living in segregated residential areas, or so-called also racialized residential areas, are the most affected by COVID. And again, connecting to what Lars said, this must be understood as the intersections between systems of oppression and different dimensions of structural racism, that therefore we have very well studied racism in the housing market, a very well studied and evidenced discrimination in the labor market, and we have discrimination, as Lars said, in the healthcare system. And we have also studied very much the processes and the role of media, stigmatization, discrimination by words or with words. And so when talking about the importance of intersectionality, we should not only focus on different identities or different forms of experience, which is of course very important, but also the intersections between these different forms of discrimination from the structural level. And I would like to recall the words of Audre Lorde, who said fantastically that there is nothing like a single struggle, because there is nothing like a single oppression. And that was her way of talk about the importance of intersectionality. So in other words, what we need to do is to look at the phenomena that we are trying to understand and to counteract, as for instance, hate, speech and discrimination and racism, with intersectional eyes, because otherwise we're looking at the wrong kind of phenomena. If we look at the wrong kind of phenomena, or we look at that with the wrong eyes or in wrong terms, we are going to suggest wrong solutions for the problem. So as discrimination and racism and structural racism is an intersectional phenomena, we need to look at that with intersectional eyes, and to articulate our struggles against that also in intersectional manners. That was my contribution. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Molina. Thank you very much, Irene. I do also have a question for you before we go to the floor here in the room, and also in cyberspace. This morning, a newspaper article in the Netherlands was published in an opinion piece about woke culture at universities and how this is a danger to the true debate. The way I phrased my question, I think you can see where I am. I think woke is about human rights protection. But obviously there are some trends in our society that think that woke is undermining academic freedom, freedom of speech, and what have you. How do you deal with this discourse in your work?
Yeah, it's a very good question. I mean, that is, unfortunately, that is a trend that it is hitting, I think, all critical thinkers and in particular researchers by these days, as a kind of, I don't know, a kind of reflect of what is happening in the United States. We are coping the worst things of what's happening in the United States, and that trend came to Europe as well. That we are seeing in Denmark, we are seeing it in Sweden, we are seeing it in other countries as well. So we are actually trying to cope with that by talking a lot about this and trying to organize a kind of a strategy against this kind of. The only way we have to really confront this and fight these tendencies are through more and more evidence, and that's what we are trying to articulate in a better way. More evidence, more research, more answers. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And please stay with us. We're going for a Q&A of about 20 minutes, I think. Yeah. And then we'll allow all of the speakers to react to the questions, to the observations. I would also like to ask everybody to be concise. Of course, observations, questions sometimes can be combined. So I see Laura Castell here in the room. Can I give you the floor and you take, I will be informed. So every now and then I will look at Giorgio. It's not that I'm not interested in your question, but I'm trying to organize the Q&A here.
I will do very briefly, but I want to do 4 remarks about 4 concrete measures that we can do as parliamentarians. The first one, maybe it could be multicultural education, understood as a citizenship education, inclusion education, and citizenship participation linked to deliberative democracy at all levels. That could be very linked to the next debate. The second one is the combat or the fight of the dehumanization of immigrants, because it's in the root of the racism speech, of the hate speech. A way to do that is to eradicate the undocumentation of immigrants, people who work and live in our countries, and they have not the same rights because of the lacking of the residency authorization. So eradicate the institutional racism linked with the colonial mentality. The third measure we think could be is the compose of the electoral list. In a way, the electoral list of the political parties, in a way that they represent the society as accurate as possible. So with different genders, identities, ethnic origins, etc. My party is doing that, and I think it's a very good measure. And the final measure we could do is, as parliamentarians, of course, legislation. And I would like to share with you very briefly, the last December, we passed a subnational law, because it's the Catalan parliament, not in the national one, for prevention, detection, addressing, and implementation of public policies against discriminatory behaviors. It has been made with the approval of the majority of 460 amendments, so a lot of amendments from all political parties, and approved by unanimity. It provides for the creation of a body for the protection and promotion, the equality and non-discrimination attached to the government, in charge for planification of the public policies every 4 years, protocols, best practices, and training. Also, an independent committee for monitoring the complaints, a parliamentary committee that will follow up the work done, the collaboration with ombudsmen and the Civil and Political Rights Office, sanctioning regulations, victims support measures, an observatory and a historical memory center, the mediation as a mean of conflict resolution, the community works measures, educational measures, the rights of the victims to follow up all the procedures, and finally, all the public sector staff have the duty of intervention and be trained. So, as you can see, it's a very comprehensive law, and I think it, unless it's a subnational level, I think it's a very important and very revolutionary law, and I would like to share with you. And thank you very much to all for organizing this important debate. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you also for the way you have politicized, from your point of view, and this question. And I'm sure many of us agree, and some of us might not agree. But I think this is also about how to deal with the diversity of the issues at stake and the diversity of views, how to deal with it. So thank you very much for your contribution. I'm looking around. Is there anybody else in the room? I see my name's Petra. Yeah, so it's good to be with Petra in the room. Petra Bayer.
A totally small question to all of the panelists. I'm wondering whether whenever it comes to intersectionality, it always worsens the situations, or if there are also existing coincidences whether that might mitigate the racism, or what intersectionality should appear that it could maybe be mitigating.
Okay, thank you very much. I saw that Damien Coutier has a question.
Yes, thank you so much, and thank you to all the persons who have spoken today in this very interesting discussion. I was listening about you mentioned before, I think, this intersection or interconnection, and you mentioned before the situation, for example, of a disabled gay person who has specific needs. I think my question is, on a certain side, certain categories of person, because of this intersection of specificities, have very specific needs which we should focus on. I take another example is that you also mentioned, actually, being gay or LGBTI in a migrant community is not maybe more difficult in certain specific communities, or in a religious community, or in a very conservative community, and there are specific needs. But on the other side, we don't want to segregate the community, to make always smaller groups of people with more specific needs, because that's what happens in the social networks somehow. People live in always smaller bubbles with only people of their who share their point of view, or who have the impression to belong to the same community. So we don't want that. We want the community as a whole with an interaction. So how do we solve this contradiction somehow, and how can we at the same time act specifically for these specific needs that you have mentioned? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And Giorgio was whispering in my ear, il y a des traductions en français, or from français to English. But I said I love it when my French-speaking colleagues speak English. But
I hope you could understand my English.
Yes, perfectly well. And I'm looking at the interpreters. It's always wonderful to have you with us. So thank you for the great work in the middle of the day. Already a compliment. Anybody else in the room? Fatsi.
This is more of a personal question to the panelists, and it follows on from Petra's question as well, is that looking at the history of intersectionality, and when we started using the term, and how initially it was an intersection between race and gender, and now it seems to have become just a scapegoat for creating oppression hierarchy as it pertains to diversity. So the more, intersects you have, the more we seem to be setting up the need or for somebody to be considered a person who has intersecting identities. And I would like to ask members of the panel, in the work that they've done when it comes to racism, are they seeing that what was initially set up to try and give prominence to the intersection between gender and race is actually doing the opposite, where, women of color or Black women are now failing to be part of the conversation because of the other multiple forms of identities that are now considered to be part of intersectionality? Thank you.
Thank you for your wonderful question. And I was looking up what the name again was of the lady who coined the term intersectionality. Kimberly Crenshaw, indeed, and this is already 30 years ago. And she did all the different, not only gender and race, but also class and other layers of. But I think you made a very valid observation there, which can be discussed by the panelists. I'm already warning the people within our call from Sweden, I think, yeah, and also Michaela. I hope she found her keys. Maybe she still is in the car. But we will come to you within a few minutes. I'm taking the last question from the room. Mamadou, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I want to thank the panelists also for your contribution. And I have a question that as a policymaker, that I hope I would be able to hear your reflections around. In Sweden, for example, when we talk about hate crime legislation, there is no particular hate crime legislation. What we have done is that hate crime becomes an aggravating factor. If somebody attacks you and beats you in the street, the crime is like physical violence or abuse, and that's what they look at. But then when they discuss that in court, the prosecutor would say this person has been abused because of the person's race or color or gender. And then that would be an aggravating factor that would bring in the hate crime. So I'm thinking, what would you say if we use legislation where we can see intersectionality, bring in, integrate intersectionality in this kind of legislation where, you know, when somebody is attacked, let's say a woman is attacked, we do not only look at the person's gender, in this case, we look at the person's ethnicity, but we can also look at several different aggravating factors that are included, you know, in the intersecting different identities. And the more intersecting identities, then the more aggravating the crime should be seen. I think that way we'll be able to use law to be able to criminalize it, but also to show very clearly that this is something that we see and we recognize. Because it's not often that we look at all the intersecting identities when we use the law in order to be able to identify why a particular person has been attacked or has been treated, you know, wrongfully. So I would like to hear your thoughts around that, if you think that can be something that we can have a look at legally to be able to implement. Thank you.
Yeah, we know about how certain laws have diminished the sentence when it's called crime passionnel. And I think in some countries around the Mediterranean, they still have the old French law that when a husband or a brother or a nephew or a cousin murders a female family member, that the sentence is diminished because of it was a passion crime. But you're pleading for exactly the opposite. Yeah, interesting. I see one question more from the audience here in the room, Mr. Jean-Pierre Grain.
Oui, merci beaucoup. Permettez-moi de vous parler en français. Merci beaucoup, Madame la Présidente. C'est vrai que c'est une discussion très intéressante concernant ces différents problèmes de racisme. Les solutions sont peut-être plus difficiles à trouver, mais moi je verrais, il y a le racisme public et politique. Dans mon pays, en Suisse, nous avons une norme antiraciste qui est pénale. À un moment, on l'a encore durci il y a 2 ans contre les problèmes sur le racisme contre les LGBT. Et il y a des suites pénales qui sont données. Je crois que c'est un bon moyen pour essayer d'éviter ce racisme public et politique. Pour ma part, l'autre problème, c'est le racisme sur les réseaux sociaux. Et en groupe, comme l'a évoqué Damien, c'est vrai que souvent, il y a des gens qui travaillent, qui s'auto-alimentent en groupe, et c'est là le plus difficile. Et là, je pense que c'est un peu un problème d'éducation, qu'il soit familial, qu'il soit public aussi. Et là, on doit vraiment lutter contre ce racisme des réseaux sociaux. Et ensuite, il y a encore le racisme que je dirais peut-être humoristique. C'est vrai que les humoristes, ils frisent toujours cette limite. Qu'est-ce qui est raciste? Qu'est-ce qui n'est pas raciste? Je vais vous dire une petite aventure qui est arrivée. Il y a notre présidente du Grand Conseil vaudois, c'est un grand conseil régional, qui a voulu remercier un collègue, et puis elle a évoqué le livre de Tintin au Congo avec une phrase en accent africain. Et ça a soulevé, disons, un tollé, effectivement, dans le cadre de personnes. Et c'est vrai que dans le cadre de ce racisme que je dirais humoristique, sur les humoristes, c'est toujours très difficile de savoir jusqu'où on peut aller et qu'est-ce qu'on doit éviter peut-être de dire. Mais pour ma part, le gros problème qu'on a actuellement, c'est ce racisme sur les réseaux sociaux, où quand il y a des questions ou autres, la réponse est directe. Et puis là, souvent, on a un enchaînement qui se fait, qui est souvent très négatif. Et là, je crois qu'on doit vraiment éduquer notre jeunesse, peut-être pas seulement les jeunes, aussi les personnes de n'importe quel âge, pour éviter qu'on ait, disons, sur les réseaux sociaux, ce racisme qui peut faire mal et qui est très percutant.
Merci. I have a book tip for everybody who wants to do some homework on the question Mr. Grant just posed. What can we say and what can we not say? It's a book written by Layla Saad, and it's about me and white supremacy, how to combat the world, change the world, and become a good ancestor. And it's homework. It's homework for people in position of power. And I think we're all in different ways in position of power, the ones who are sitting in this room and who are speaking. And I did the homework, and I can only speak from my personal experience that she gives me a mirror that my jokes, how well intended, sometimes can be perceived by somebody on the receiving end of that joke as extremely painful. And I think this is something if we want to be a good ancestor, that in 100 years, I think some of the things in my own country, like Black Pete, people will really say, you remember that your great grandmother actually played Black Pete? And people will be like, oh my God, seriously? Things have changed. So homework, me and white supremacy, for everybody who wants, I will tweet it later on the place equality, because I can see your struggle, what to say, not to say, but when you're in a position of power, it's easier to make jokes than when you're on the receiving end and not in a position of power. But that's, you didn't ask me the question, but this is something I wrote down as something I wanted to share as the chair. I'm going to close the Q&A, and I'm going back in the sequence of the panelists, and I'm going to Mrs. Michaela Moa, who is the coordinator of the European Union Anti-Racism Department, I think it is, or this is a function. Michaela, are you still with us? Yes. And I hope you can hear me, and I would like to invite you to take 2-3 minutes to respond to, you found your keys.
Yes.
Well, maybe you can help us to find how to unlock the dilemmas around intersectionality and political work. Please react to whatever you want to react, take 2-3 minutes.
Yes, perfect. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Wonderful. Yes, thank you to all the speakers, first of all, for such interesting interventions and really kind of giving us a good insight on the different levels of intersectionality and in different areas from the work that the equality bodies are doing to the academia, to the work we're doing in the Commission and the parliamentary level. Thank you so much. I think when we talk about I think what you said just now was a very, very important point. I think, you know, this notion, this is on a personal note now, this notion of a racist joke, to me, it's just racism. I mean, to me, racism is in no way, shape or form, personally, it's not funny. So I think just using a term like racist joke it's a non-existent concept. So I'd like to start there. And then about intersectionality in general and what has happened, I think, with intersectionality is as has happened with a lot of human rights work that is being done around anti-racism or LGBTIQ equality. There is kind of this certain hijacking of not only hijacking of these frameworks, but also these counter narratives that end up being repeated to where they are then completely misunderstood. And this is certainly what has happened with the understanding of what anti-racism is, or what intersectionality is. And I think one of the wrong, the false narratives around intersectionality is exactly this idea of it being about some kind of oppression Olympics. This is not my term. I can't remember who coined this term, but that this idea that it's about who is the most oppressed, as far as just adding these protected characteristics on top of each other. And that's certainly not the point of intersectionality, but actually the intersectional lens aims to make visible the kind of how discrimination and racism and these different forms of oppression compound to create a completely different or new type of racism or discrimination, taking into account these different forms of oppression, from power structures, from patriarchy to sexism to trans and homophobia, etc. So this is the idea behind it. And also another tenet of intersectionality is certainly coalition building. So when we have the question about minorities within minorities, it is certainly not to, the idea is not to kind of separate different groups, but to on the contrary, build coalitions to where we can then, from an intersectional framework, make better, have a better lens in entirety to look at racism and oppression and different forms of oppression. And then just to add to one more point that Malcolm made about legislation, and then perhaps how could intersectionality be added to the legislative framework. I think the closest thing we have currently is the closest thing we have currently is it's the related concept, which is multiple discrimination. But of course, they're not identical, because multiple discrimination really refers to again, separate, simultaneous, in a sense, identity-based kind of cases of discrimination targeted at an individual, where again, intersectional discrimination looks at these different grounds that are intertwined to produce this unique and new type of discrimination. So there's a lot of work to do there on how can we kind of, the next step from looking at legislation from the multiple discrimination viewpoint would be this intersectional framework. But how can it be done? Of course, jurisprudence and precedent, and having cases that work in such a way, we have to kind of develop it in a sense. But how can it be done? This I don't have an answer to, and I'm hoping that this is something we can think about also by working together on the work we are currently doing.
Thank you, Michaela. Thank you very much for being with us, and please stay with us for the responses of the other panelists. But for now, can we please give her an applause? Thank you for giving such a valuable contribution. And then I'm looking at Giorgio, whether Mr. Ardenius, Lars, is already with us online. We're going to Sweden. I always feel like I'm in the Eurovision Song Contest now, so... Are we going to Stockholm? Oh no, I don't know actually. Lars, Mr. Aeneas, the floor is yours. Can you hear us?
Yes, thank you very much.
Yeah. If you could also take 2-3 minutes for your response to some of the observations and questions.
Yes, I will say some words about legislation, which I think is important to have. Of course, that's nothing if you don't work with it, but the fact that we in Sweden merged the discrimination law 12 years ago, at that time, 12 years ago, there were different ombudsmen with different grounds, and and the decision was to merge the different ombudsmen to one ombudsman, and that is my organization today. And in the legislation, it was very clear that all the grounds are protected for discrimination. So I think that my organization now, the Ombudsman, has the mandate to work with all the grounds. I think it's a good thing. I mean, when it comes to working with an intersectional approach, at least I think it's pedagogical that you can see all the grounds in the same legislation, and that the one ombudsman has the mandate to deal with all the protected grounds. I will also comment the idea or proposal from Mr. Mamadou Diallo, member of the Swedish Parliament. I think that is a very interesting idea. I mean, in cases that including intersectional discrimination, that in those cases maybe if you go to court and ask for damages, that could be a reason for a higher damage in those cases. So I think that is a very interesting idea from Mr. Mamadou Diallo. I mean, to get an in-depth understanding of discrimination, both when it comes to its complexity and to its seriousness, I think it's necessary to have an intersectional approach. It seems to me that it's obvious that we must see and understand that individuals have several identities, and that this also affects how the discrimination that they are exposed to manifest itself. This is necessary when talking to those who are victims of discrimination, but also when arguing in court or working to promote and prevent structural discrimination. I think this has been a very important meeting. I really like this one. Different actors meeting in the same place, researchers, civil society, a member of the parliament. So I'm very thankful for this meeting. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I would also like to share a round of applause for your contribution. I hope you can hear it in Stockholm or wherever you are in Sweden.
Yes.
Thank you very much for being with us. And we go to Farad and Chika here in the room.
Thank you,
Same
Petra.
for you, 2-3 minutes.
I will try just to briefly answer some question about a good joke and the power of who gonna decide what is a good joke or not. I cannot count the many times that I hear the good gay joke. I was the one who only has the power to accept this kind of good jokes. I understand that artistic freedom is really key, it's really important. But at the same time, if you're making a joke that is hurting people, that is strengthening stereotypes, you need to be able as well to receive criticism, and not only to flag with your artistic freedom. You need to have a dialogue, and you need to be aware that you can be, can flew hatred. So it's really a matter of who has the power, and mostly those who are subjected of the joke who has not the power. I just want to say something about the woke and cancel culture, because it's discussion going on hardly also in Belgium. It's bizarre to see that we have really first generation, and I think Malcolm can agree with me on that. The generation of my parents was learned to be silenced, to not make too much noise, not to make too much space. And now we have the first generation who are standing up, who are being really strongly. And what is the first thing that we're hearing? Be not that loud, be not that present. Can you imagine if we say that to the women movement? If we say that to the LGBT movement, where are we standing? Would we be here? So I have one big message. It's not about woke. It's about human rights, and it's about dignity. And it's about leadership. We are not going to be silenced anymore. The generation of our parents was the last generation who's going to be silenced. 3, about the small bubbles, and it's really good question. It learns me that there is really, in first, a need of safe spaces. That's really important to acknowledge. There's a need of safe spaces because a lot of people living on different intersections doesn't feel safe. But at the same time, and I think we can agree on that, And as we mentioned previously, there is as well a need of coalition, but a coalition not on the term of the majority, but on the terms of those who need progress. And that is really a big, it's important. And about Petra's question about mitigating, it triggers me a lot because you're right, and it's a good question, because I had experienced probably less racism because I'm a gay man. Because you're a gay man, so you're not that dangerous like your Muslim brothers who are straight. You're gay, so you're effeminated. You're not that kind of stereotype image of the danger man. So yes, sometimes it helps to live on another section, but at the same time, it tells us a lot how people look to other sections. So yeah, that's my take out.
Thank you very much. My head is spinning. I will comment later on. I'll go to Uppsala, or at least our last speaker is from Uppsala University, Professor Irene Marulina from the Center for Multidisciplinary Studies on Racism. I also give you the floor. Well, I didn't ask for applause for Farad, but he already got it.
Thank you. Thank you for giving me the last word. It's really a huge responsibility. I don't know what to say because the answers have been so good already. But I wanted just to connect to Fathi's and Petra's questions. First, on the intersecting identities and the loss that that women of color can have been experiencing because of this kind of explosion of intersectionality used everywhere for saying everywhere. And I think it is a very good observation, and I think many women of color and their organizations are reacting against that. And I think it's a good thing because some interpretations of intersectionality are actually very kind of, I would say, not helping to any, any kind of liberation project. And I would say that those uses of the word intersectionality, the term intersectionality, are those much more attached to this kind of individual, liberal, and in some cases neoliberal identities like I am not only a middle-class mother, I am also a middle-class mother of color, and that is not the point. Of course, it's not. The point is, as exactly as Petra said at the beginning, no, not at the beginning, but a short while ago, and recalling who coined the term intersectionality, Kimberly Crenshaw. Well, actually, the intersections there were not on identities. They were on systems of oppression, creating those identities and creating also discrimination based on those created identities. So it's not a self, kind of elected, a self-chosen identity we are talking about. We are talking about systems of oppression creating identities on the basis of oppression. So I think it's a very good observation, and I think we should fight actually or struggle for the use of intersectionality in this kind of liberating way, and not in the kind of a more opportunistic, use of a term for whatever purpose, but not, liberation. And on the comment on mitigation of racism, yes, exactly as Farad said, and I think it's an excellent example of that, since intersectionality is a relational and contingent phenomena. Of course, it depends on the occasion. It depends on the context in which it is operating. What the experience, the individual experience will be. So exactly that. I mean, a woman may be a woman from the white supremacist group in a white supremacist context would be probably more, discriminated than the men in that context. The very moment that you put that woman in a context you know, a more racial diversity, that woman would be, you know, immediately, you know, the representative for the supremacist group and the representative of the dominating group. So that is exactly what the you know, the gains of using in the perspective of intersectionality gives us, that it is relational and it is contingent, and that is what we should actually use it much more. So thank you.
Thank you, and also a round of applause for you, Mrs. Molina.
Thank you so
Irene,
much.
thank you very much. And if you have time, please stay with me for a few more minutes when I share with you the takeaways I have of this session. I have 5, but a bit layered because that fits with the intersectionality of the discussion. So 5 layered takeaways. My first takeaway is that when we talk about intersectionality and racism, we really have to discuss power and the systematic discrimination, forms of discrimination. There's one saying, don't fix the women, fix the system. And I think don't fix racism. Well, don't fix people who are discriminated again, but fix the racist systems. And I think I am always intrigued by this concept of space. How can you then divide space when it's about power and supremacy? And how do we do this in the context of our work as members of parliamentarians? It's a question, it's an observation. I don't have answers. The second takeaway is that some of you mentioned the impact of COVID, or the way COVID has revealed the intersectionality of the effects of COVID in different groups, in different places. I was the rapporteur of one of the reports on upholding human rights in times of crisis and pandemics, and we had 3 conclusions in that report. And I think these 3 approaches could be very beneficial for any report we make to ensure that they're intersectional. One is, so this is still my observation too, so A, we have to look at that one size never fits all. So we need a differentiation of measures. B, we need disaggregated data. Who is affected in which way? And C, we need a differentiation of voices, different voices. And I think for us, as the Pace Equality and the No Hate Parliamentary Alliances, if we have this checklist of differentiation of measures, differentiation of data, and differentiation of voices, we will always have a good starting point for making our reports and recommendations intersectional. My third observation is about awareness. You can't be what you can't see, but you cannot not see any longer what you have seen through the eyes of people who shared their personal experiences that might not be yours, but that you are responsible for as well. And I heard a lot of mention about education, citizens' education, and I agree. We have to get them young. But I must say that the sexist jokes very often come from people who had their education quite a while ago. So maybe we should also look in our own system in the parliament to have maybe courses or workshops and bring in people from literature, you know, and to talk about, can I say anything? What does it mean? One example about what, for media, there is a podcast in the Netherlands called Dipsaus by women of color, for women of color, and anybody else who is interested. And I'm listening to them. I can send it to you. I think you would be fascinated, but I think others would well. And it really made me realize, hey, there is another world out there. Getting out of your bubble and being able to learn. Curiosity is something. Fourth observation about the definition of hate crime. I think the question Mamadou raised is a very important one. How to bring in hate crime into legislation. And we as members of parliament have a responsibility here as well. Geert Wilders called my party leader a witch. 4 weeks later, she is in a court because of a death threat. Is there a relation between the one and the other? I don't know. But the fact that we're calling each other's names in our parliaments is not an innocent issue. People feel inspired that people in position of power are calling each other names in the arena of democracy in such a way, it gives credence to the people who think, well, if he can do it, then I can make it worse. So, and I think, yeah, somebody said this is about human rights. I think we should re-envisage or re-look at all the treaties we already have and all the conventions we have. We don't have to reinvent the wheel. I mean, there are a number of treaties that give us enough leeway to work on these definitions. And to conclude, I think Farhad said this, and this was mentioned also by others, I think by Mrs. Arrhenius, but about the coalition building. In Dutch schools, in many Dutch schools, there are gay-straight alliances. When Farhad speaks up, I'm now making it personal between the two of us, when he speaks up about gender equality, I feel supported. I'm sure that when I speak up about modern family, you feel supported. And together we will make a stronger coalition for equality. Now, I started with Amin Malouf, who is from Lebanon, and we all know what happened to Lebanon. When they started to disentangle the mosaic of this beautiful society, things went wrong. And he has taught me that this big question, how to deal with diversity, how to deal with this mosaic, this precious mosaic of our society, but also be able to integrate new beautiful gems. Because I think this is, in a way, alludes to Petra's question. It's not so much mitigation, but it's new gems, diamonds, pearls, or maybe just pebbles from the beach. Not everybody has to be a top sportsman or woman or person. Huh? I mean, you can be. So I think as we appreciate the mosaic of our own personalities, and if we are capable of appreciating and cherishing and protecting the mosaic of the 21st century Europe, then intersectionality might in the end be something that we will not see as an oppression anymore, but that we will see as something very precious. I thank you all.
Okay, thank you very much. Let me just take this opportunity to thank Petra for an amazing moderation of this panel. Petra mentioned something that a lot of things that are great, but one of the things that she mentioned that just caught my attention is that we do not have to really reproduce new legislation because we have already a lot that we do not implement. And one of the things that we've done in the Alliance is we have a compilation of relevant text adopted by the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe. And this text is all related to the work that we do. And this is done to make it easier for all of you and your national work to be able to easily just look at this document and see what kind of legislation that do we have that you can use for your own purpose, rather than maybe going to the website and trying to Google and find all this information. It's a lot of information. It's over 70 years of existence, so a lot of resolutions we have. But these ones are specifically picked because they are directly connected to the work that we do in the Alliance. So please make sure you have a copy of this. It makes your work a lot easier. Thank you. And now I think we have a short break. And after the short break, we will return here to have our last but very important panel. I think it starts at 3:30. So the time is now 3:10. So we have about 20 minutes and then we start the next panel. So thank you very much. Okay, thank you, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back from the break. We're gonna have our third session, last session for this day, this conference. And it's also an extremely important session because we've spoken about, racism, we've spoken about intersectionality, and we're now going to talk about the cultural sector, racism, collective imagination, and the cultural sector industry. We have amazing panelists, but one person that I want to take this opportunity to introduce is our moderator, Alexandra Pascalidou. Alexandra Pascalidou is, for those of you that don't know her, because in Sweden she doesn't need introduction. She's well-known journalist, but I think even internationally she's well-known and recognized journalist that has been working tirelessly on the issues that we're discussing here today. So I feel privileged to have you on board and to help us navigate this very important topic that we'll be discussing here today. So without further ado, let me just take this opportunity to welcome you, and the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Mamadou Malcolm Jallow, and thank you so much, all of you, for great speeches and interventions, and especially also the intersectional perspectives that I so much have been fighting for and working for and struggling with for so many years. And in fact, I am very, very tired, I have to say. But at the same time, I'm very happy that you address all these issues together on a European level, because this is exactly what is needed. So I'm very proud and privileged to be able to moderate this conversation on ethnic bias, on stigmatization and stereotyping, negative stereotypes in the cultural industries, in cinema, television, and media, not at least. So this is what we will discuss. And I'm a journalist, an author, a playwright. I do many different things because my main goal has been to tell the stories, the untold stories, to try to give people their voices back, people that have been deprived of their voices. And this started very early in my own life. And back then, I had no idea it was called intersectional perspective. I only knew that I was a migrant kid growing up in Rinkeby, the most stigmatized, the poorest suburb in Sweden. And I grew up with a single mother. She was working class mother, and we were poor. I was a girl, and you know, media came to visit us now and then, and they always somehow portrayed us as the others, the scary foreigners, those that were like the scapegoats, the problems, the parasites. We felt like animals in a zoo, I have to tell. And then were all these stories out there in media that we didn't really recognize ourselves, I have to say. So instead of hating media, I decided quite early on that I wanted to become media. At that time, I was very optimistic. I thought that you could, being a migrant kid from that stigmatized background and suburb, I thought you could change things. I thought that you could make a difference. And today I'm sitting here and realizing that it's a hard work and that it never really stops. I mean, the price you have to pay for trying to do this. So I started working for Swedish TV 26 years ago, and I feel so grateful and so privileged for that. But from my first day at work, I've received death threats. They called me a bloody migrant whore, a dirty Jew, dirty gypsy, dirty anything you can imagine. And they told me that they would rape me, and they came to my home. When I say they, I mean racists and Nazis. They even came masked with guns. A couple of years ago, they demonstrated with my face on the placards outside the book fair. They come when I give speeches. And yesterday, people told me on Twitter, you know, that toxic platform, that I should go home, or terrible things would happen to me. And I am not alone. I'm one of millions. And when I say millions, I don't only mean my journalist colleagues. I also mean people that defend democracy, defend human rights, and raise their voices against racism, against exclusion, against discrimination, and so on. So it is a very sad and very polarized and very polemic time we're having this discussion, and that is also a reason why I'm so grateful for this. And the problem nowadays is also that they don't only address all these death threats and this harassment and the hatred against me, because I'm used to it. I mean, I'm used to this verbal violence, this sexist and racist, tyranny in my everyday life. But the problem is that they address this to my bosses. And that fear is very, it transmits easily. So they asked my bosses to fire me, which has also happened at times. And being a freelance journalist also means that you're extremely vulnerable because you don't have any kind of protection and you never know what will happen the day after and so on. But I think, and I'm convinced that we have to fight, and that's why I always find new ways of telling these stories. So that's why I write books. My latest book, The Mothers, is a collection of interviews with mothers in the poorest and the most stigmatized and marginalized suburbs in Sweden. And many of these mothers have lost their kids in shootings. And we're talking about hundreds of young men and kids also. And they have been dehumanized, systematically dehumanized, often reduced to numbers. Nobody really cared about who they were when they were alive or what they dreamed about or what the mothers did and so on. They were blamed. We could see systemic victim blaming and so on. So I decided to interview mothers just to make humans of these dehumanized people. And only 3-4 days ago, we had this tragic incident where a very famous Swedish rapper was killed. And what we saw was also very interesting in this discussion we're having now, because this young boy, he was only 19, he was an artist, and he was white, and he was Swedish, and he was from a middle-class area. And suddenly we saw a totally different treatment, portrayal, and we also saw that the establishment and media also used another approach when it came to how they reacted to this tragic incident the other day. So this is, I could talk about this for a long time. I can only tell you that I think that the fight for diversity and inclusion is a daily struggle for many people, and I think democracy should be a verb, because it really needs daily action from many of us. But most of all, it also needs courage, very much courage. And therefore, I am so proud to present this amazing panel that you have invited to this session. And you will all be able to ask them questions, and I am happy to present them right now. And that is Kajsa Ravin, who's the General Director at the Swedish Arts Council. It's Rokhaya Diallo, a journalist from France. It's Anna Serner, former CEO at the Swedish Film Institute. Zan Beleniuk, a member of the Verkhovna Rada, and he's an Olympic gold medalist. A warm welcome to all of you. Can you hear me? Hello?
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Okay. So I was like, when I heard the silence, I was like, oh no, that's a connection. Okay, so I'm very happy. So what I would like to do is to give you the opportunity to share your thoughts and introduce yourselves, and please also dare to be personal. What is it? Why are you passionate about this? And why does this hurt? So I would like to begin with, you have like 7 or 10 minutes maybe for your introduction, that you can elaborate on the topic. And then we will also have the chance for Q&A. So please, Kajsa Ravin, the floor is yours. Hello. Hello.
Let's see.
Can you see me now?
Ah,
Voila.
yes, yes.
Well, thank you so much for inviting me to speak at this very important conference. And I'll say a few words about myself, I think, at the end. So I prepared a speech for you, and it's a bit bureaucratic because I'm a bureaucrat, but I'm a passionate bureaucrat. So, dear participants, thank you so much for inviting me. And I would first like to say something about the Swedish Arts Council, because I'm here as the Director General of the Swedish Arts Council. And we are an arm's length institution that receives assignments from the government and the Ministry of Culture. And we distribute public funding to the cultural sector, to regions and municipalities and non-profit organizations to promote the development of culture. All our work aim at achieving the cultural policy objectives in Sweden. And we have three main objectives. And the first one we call the independence objective. And that is that culture must be a dynamic, challenging, and independent force based on freedom of expression. And then we have the participation objective, that everyone should have the opportunity to participate in cultural life. And then the societal objective, that creativity, diversity, and artistic quality should characterize social development and societal development. So, something about the Swedish discussion at the moment concerning social inclusion and artistic freedom. This spring, the Swedish Agency for Cultural Policy Analysis published a report on political governance and artistic freedom, in which the governance of the central government, the state, the regions, and the municipalities were examined. The Swedish Agency for Cultural Policy Analysis found that there is a risk that governance of art and culture should or could also take place in Sweden. Different surveys aimed at those who are active in the arts and culture sector, artists that is, who applied for public grants, determined that some perceive questions regarding gender equality, ethnical diversity, LGBT, QI, disabilities, and other issues as governing, and that art is thus not free. Which themes or ideas that are subject to artistic expressions should not be affected positively or negatively in public funding. That was the case. So this has been a main discussion in Sweden for 6 months. For us, it's important to say that whose artistic freedom and how artistic freedom is protected and maintained is key in our coming work. Artistic and cultural expressions create space for us to reflect on ourselves and our societies, to connect with different perspectives, to understand and learn from each other, to test and contest ideas, and ultimately to inspire us to imagine new paths to individual, collective, and social development. Artistic freedom ensures that these expressions represent the full diversity and dynamism of our cultural ecosystems and societies through both creation and participation. This therefore places demands and responsibilities on all within the cultural ecosystem to safeguard artistic freedom. However, we can only do this if we first recognize the rights and responsibilities it entails, understand the political, economic, social, technological, environmental, and cultural conditions that enable it, and identify and address threats to its practice and fulfillment. Artistic freedom entails human rights recognized and protected under international law, including the right to create without censorship, intimidation, imprisonment, or death. To have artistic work supported, distributed, and remunerated. to freedom of movement, to freedom of association, to the protection of social and economic rights, and the right to participate in cultural life. It is the freedom to imagine, create, and distribute diverse cultural expressions free of governmental censorship, political interference, or the pressure of non-state actors. It includes the right to all citizens to have access to the works, and it is essential of the well-being of societies. And that's from the UNESCO in 2019. This freedom relies on a cultural value chain that fosters conditions in which artists can create, present, distribute, and share their work, in which citizens can participate in cultural life, which is a cultural right shared by all. The creation and safeguarding of these conditions are shared responsibilities for the international community. This lies at the heart of the UNESCO 2005 Convention for the Protection and Promotion of the Diversity of Cultural Expressions, which includes in its 4 goals that respect for human rights and fundamental freedoms of expression, information, and communication is guaranteed as a prerequisite for the creation and distribution of diverse cultural expressions. It also informs that the 1980 recommendation concerning the status of the artist, which calls on member states to improve the professional, social, and economic status of artists through the implementation of policies and measures related to training, social security, employment, income and tax conditions, mobility, and freedom of expression. This is very evident throughout the pandemic as well. Worldwide, policymakers and advocates have driven improvement of these conditions and the protection of free artistic expression. However, we are currently also seeing backlashes. Various ongoing and recent events have had a seismic impact on the world at large, from political changes to environmental disasters, unfolding rights in our presence, and of course to the COVID-19 pandemic and its multifold effects. It has accentuated existing challenges for artists to create and for citizens to participate in cultural life. Our ability to maintain and further improve conditions for artistic freedom and to secure equitable access to arts and culture requires policymakers, funding bodies, and civil society representatives across the cultural ecosystem to share in the duty to balance and create enabling environments that empower artists to express themselves freely, that guarantee the right to all to participate in arts and culture, and that allow all citizens to see themselves reflected. Thank you. So, I leave it there, Alexandra. And of course, I could say something about my background, also growing up in in the poorest neighborhood in my city, but also been able to use the public system in Sweden with schools and universities all the way to come to where I am today. So that has been a leverage for equal rights, I must say.
Yes, yes, exactly. And I totally agree with you. I would never be able to study at the university as the first one in my family and my neighborhood without that public system. Thank you so much, Kaisa. I have so many thoughts about the artistic freedom that you're talking about, and we can discuss that even more later during the conversation, because sometimes I have the feeling that some kind of artistic expressions are defined as extremism, and some other kinds of artistic expressions are considered to be artistic and free. And I would like to discuss more of that later. Thank you so much, Kaisa. And now we're moving to a journalist from France. Bonjour, Rokhaya Diallo.
Bonjour.
Ça va?
Ça va très bien, merci.
Très bien, enchantée, enchantée.
Très bien.
Voilà. The floor is yours.
Thank you. I wanted to share a clip from one of my documentary with you, but unfortunately it's not possible to show it. Mais je vais continuer en français. Je pense que ce sera plus simple pour moi. Yeah. Désolée pour tout le monde qui. Donc, je vais commencer par me présenter. Donc, je m'appelle Rokhaya Diallo, je suis journaliste en France. Je travaille comme réalisatrice aussi de documentaires. J'écris aussi des ouvrages et c'est vrai que les principaux axes de mon travail sont le travail sur la question de la diversité raciale et la question du genre aussi, qui sont des questions que j'aime bien croiser. Et c'est vrai que la table ronde sur l'intersectionnalité qui m'a précédée était très intéressante en ce sens. Et je pense que moi, ce qui m'intéresse dans cette table ronde, c'est vraiment la question de la manière dont les représentations culturelles agissent sur les représentations nationales. Et le documentaire que j'ai réalisé, dont je voulais vous montrer un extrait, malheureusement, c'est pas possible parce que je m'y suis prise un petit peu tard. C'est un documentaire que j'ai réalisé l'année dernière, qui s'appelle en français « Où sont les Noirs ?» et en anglais, je l'ai appelé « Acting While Black ». Qui parle en fait de la manière dont les personnes noires sont représentées sur les écrans français, aussi bien à la télévision que dans le cinéma. Et en fait, c'est à la fois l'histoire d'une invisibilisation, mais d'une survisibilisation en termes de caricature. Et ce qui est intéressant dans la représentation des Noirs, et moi j'ai fait mon documentaire sur les Noirs, mais en vérité, c'est valable pour toutes les minorités, pour les personnes d'origine maghrébine, par exemple nord-africaine, pour les personnes asiatiques. Il y a toujours cette question de la représentation caricaturale. Et ce qui a été observé par une sociologue que j'ai interviewée dans le documentaire, mais qui travaille par ailleurs de manière très prolifique, hein, qui s'appelle Marie-France Malonga, c'est qu'il y avait 3 types de représentations récurrentes des minorités dans la fiction française, donc aussi bien dans la fiction télévisuelle que dans la fiction de cinéma. Et en fait, il y avait 3 profils qui revenaient de manière récurrente. Le premier profil, c'est le profil de la victime. Donc, c'est une personne qui est minoritaire, qui est victime de quelque chose, de quelque chose de dangereux, et qui généralement est sauvée par un personnage blanc. Donc, c'est ce personnage qui revient de manière récurrente et qu'on observe en fait très très souvent dans le cinéma et dans la télévision. Et je pense que ce n'est pas valable que pour la France. Le deuxième profil qu'elle avait identifié, c'est le profil de la personne qu'elle appelait le sauvage. Donc, c'est une personne, en fait, qui n'est pas adaptée au contexte culturel occidental et, en fait, dont l'inadaptation peut être source de comique, mais surtout, en fait, qui ne colle pas avec l'environnement majoritaire qui est celui auquel les spectateurs s'identifient. Et donc, c'est quelqu'un qui vient d'un pays étranger, généralement, et dont on accentue, en fait, les caractéristiques locales. Enfin, les caractéristiques d'origine. Et enfin, le troisième personnage que Marie-France Malonga avait identifié, c'est le fauteur de troubles. Donc, cette personne-là, c'est une personne qui ne respecte pas les règles, qui va être un délinquant, qui va être un terroriste, qui va être quelqu'un, en fait, qui va causer des problèmes et qui va faire soit être une personne qui produit de la délinquance, soit une personne criminelle. Et ça, ce sont les profils types qu'on retrouve. Et à ça, on peut ajouter, donc c'est l'extrait que je voulais vous montrer, quelque chose qui concerne spécifiquement les femmes, qui est la fétichisation ou l'exotisation, où là, en fait, on va retrouver une hypersexualisation des femmes, donc des femmes noires, des femmes asiatiques, etc., qu'on va renfermer dans certains registres. Il faut savoir qu'en France, on a un débat très intéressant sur la personnalité de Josephine Baker, qui est une femme qui est née à Saint-Louis, aux États-Unis, et qui est devenue une star en France. C'est la première star noire en France, et qui a été connue parce qu'elle a participé à un spectacle qu'à l'époque, on avait appelé les Revues Nègres. Et en fait, elle s'est notamment illustrée parce qu'elle dansait sur scène à Paris avec une ceinture de banane autour des hanches. Et en fait, c'était l'époque coloniale et c'était une époque où on lui a fait, adopter un certain rôle, qui était le rôle de la femme noire, qui était nue et qui portait en fait sur elle toute cette forme d'exotisme. Et en fait, la figure de Josephine Baker est ambiguë parce que c'est une femme qui en même temps était très engagée, a été dans la résistance et qui est une femme vraiment très inspirante, mais elle incarnait aussi cette altérisation du corps noir et du corps différent. Et je pense qu'il y a un héritage aujourd'hui dans la manière dont les femmes noires sont représentées sur les écrans. Et les actrices que j'ai interviewées, donc qui étaient notamment Aïssa Maïga, Sonia Roland et France Zobda, en fait, expliquaient qu'elles recevaient souvent des rôles dans lesquels, en fait, elles incarnaient notamment des femmes prostituées. Et donc, elles disaient, c'est pas tant le problème que d'incarner une femme prostituée, mais c'est la récurrence. C'est comme si, en fait, en tant que femme noire, en fait, elle n'avait pas la possibilité de jouer autre chose qu'une femme qui est travailleuse du sexe, ou une femme qui va être une femme très exotique, très attirante, très désirable, et que finalement, on n'arrivait pas à les percevoir, en fait, au-delà de ce corps qui était un corps non blanc et un corps exotisé. Et je trouve que c'est intéressant parce que, en fait, les hommes non blancs, notamment les hommes noirs et arabes, vont être considérés comme des dangers. Et les femmes, notamment noires et arabes, vont être considérées comme des proies, entre guillemets, sexuelles, ou des femmes qui vont susciter le désir des personnes dominantes. Et donc, dans le cinéma, c'est important de faire évoluer ces représentations. Il y a eu un collectif d'actrices qui a été mené notamment par Aïssa Maïga, dont je viens de parler, qui s'appelait « Noir n'est pas mon métier », qui ont écrit un livre, donc c'était 16 actrices noires, et qui ont monté les marches du Festival de Cannes pour rappeler en fait que leur métier n'était pas d'être noire, mais qu'elles étaient actrices avant tout. Et qu'en tant qu'actrices, elles voulaient avoir des rôles complexes. Si je peux faire le lien par exemple avec mon histoire, donc moi je suis née en France, mes parents viennent de Gambie et du Sénégal, et donc j'ai toujours vécu à Paris en France. Et c'est vrai qu'à titre personnel, j'ai pris conscience du racisme assez tard. J'ai grandi à Paris, donc dans un quartier relativement populaire et très, très mélangé, où finalement, le fait d'être noir n'était pas un sujet. Et ce qui s'est passé, c'est que plus j'avançais dans mes études, moins il y avait de gens qui me ressemblaient. Et à un certain moment, en fait, on a fini par me demander d'où je venais. Et moi, je viens de Paris, en fait. Je ne suis jamais venue en France. Et en fait, on me posait la question comme si j'avais une autre réponse que ma ville à répondre. Et souvent, les gens me disaient, mais avant, tu étais où? Et je disais, mais avant, j'étais pas née, en fait. Et c'est très intéressant en fait de voir comment les gens, sur la base de notre faciès, en fait, nous collent des choses qui ne sont pas liées à notre histoire. Moi, je suis très fière de mes origines et j'ai la chance d'aller régulièrement au Sénégal. Mais mon histoire, c'est pas une histoire de migration. Moi, j'ai toujours vécu ici. Et donc, finalement, quand on m'écoute et quand on m'entend, on entend que j'ai un accent français et parisien. Mais les gens, en fait, n'écoutent pas, mais regardent. Et ce qu'ils voient, en fait, c'est ce qu'ils associent à quelque chose qui n'est pas français. Et moi, j'ai grandi devant une télévision où je voyais très, très rarement des personnes qui me ressemblaient. Quand j'en voyais, généralement, c'était des Américains. Donc, heureusement qu'il y avait les séries américaines pour nous faire un peu de bien. Et je dis merci à Will Smith et au Prince de Bel-Air de m'avoir permis de passer une adolescence heureuse. C'était vraiment une source de nourriture pour notre ego quand on n'était pas blanc. Et c'était tellement rare que même mes amis qui étaient arabes, en fait, s'identifiaient aussi au Prince de Bel-Air parce que ça leur faisait du bien de voir des gens qui leur ressemblaient un petit peu, qui n'étaient pas tout à fait blancs. Mais c'est vrai que voilà, le fait de grandir face à un écran qui ne nous reflète pas nous donne le sentiment qu'on n'existe pas. Et ça, c'est très, très important de voir que la représentation a une incidence. Aujourd'hui, en tant que journaliste, donc je travaille beaucoup sur les plateaux de télévision où je fais du commentaire d'actualité politique. Et j'ai souvent des jeunes qui m'arrêtent dans la rue, notamment des jeunes noirs, des jeunes asiatiques ou des jeunes arabes qui me disent « Merci madame, grâce à vous, on sait qu'on peut devenir journaliste. » Et en fait, ça fait vraiment du bien et ça fait se rendre compte que tant qu'on ne voit pas une personne qui nous ressemble sur un écran, on a beaucoup de difficultés à se projeter et à se dire quand je serai grand, je pourrais être journaliste ou je pourrais être député comme Diallo, par exemple. Il faut le voir en fait à la télévision, il faut l'entendre pour se dire que c'est possible et ça nous est ouvert. Tout ça pour dire que les gens qui produisent des images ont vraiment une influence sur la société et sur les représentations. Et donc, le fait de représenter correctement les femmes, donc dans des rôles où elles peuvent avoir le pouvoir, où elles peuvent être leaders, où leur personnage ne dépend pas des hommes, les rôles où les personnes non blanches, en fait, finalement, sont au premier plan, où elles ont des familles, où elles ne sont pas les seules personnes non blanches de la fiction, eh bien, ça permet à tout le monde de se projeter, et puis aussi aux gens d'arrêter de me demander d'où je viens. C'est-à-dire que si on voit des personnages comme moi, qui sont des femmes parisiennes, qui sont journalistes, qui sont professeurs, qui sont comptables, qui sont caissières aussi, hein. Il y a tous les métiers qui existent, mais qui vivent une vie en France et qui sont légitimes, eh ben, ça permet vraiment à tout le monde de ne pas se poser la question de l'autre, mais de considérer que l'autre fait partie de nous. Et je crois vraiment que les initiatives qui sont menées autour du cinéma, autour de la télévision, mais aussi du journalisme sont très, très importantes. Pour ce qui me concerne, moi, j'ai vraiment à cœur de transmettre. Je considère que, en tout cas, c'est mon rôle. Je ne dis pas que c'est le rôle de tout le monde, mais que j'ai beaucoup appris en 12 ans de journalisme. Et j'ai envie que des jeunes femmes, des jeunes hommes, qui, parce qu'ils sont des femmes, parce qu'ils ne sont pas blancs, puissent économiser le temps que moi, j'ai pu perdre en cherchant en fait ma place dans ce monde qui ne m'était pas ouvert. Donc voilà, merci beaucoup pour votre écoute. Merci. Merci.
We can't hear you.
Pardon-moi. Merci beaucoup, Kaya Diallo. We will talk later at the end with the conversation. Thank you so much. And now Anna Särner, the former CEO of the Swedish Film Institute. And she's former, a month ago or something, Anna Särner. She's been working so hard, struggling really, with diversity in the film industry. Please, Anna, the floor is yours.
Anna, can you request the floor, please? Thank you.
Where is Anna?
Yes, sorry. Thank you very much. Thank you, Alexander, for the presentation, and thank you all for the words before. I will try to go into more of how to do diversity practically, because I think you all said it so well. I have an unstable internet connection, but I will try. If you can't hear me, let me know, and I will switch off my camera. But you have heard Mrs. Kajsa talk to you about the assignments of Swedish public funders to include and make sure we have everyone's equal right. And
okay.
Anna, could you request the floor again, please, and start from the beginning? We're sorry about that, please.
Anna? Oh, there she is.
yes. Well, shall I start all over from the beginning?
Yeah, after your first sentences, maybe.
Yeah.
We lost you after, yeah.
Yeah, so to make it short, I'm going to try to tell you how we have been working with inclusion on a larger scale. And I think it's important to remember that it's in our constitution, in the Swedish constitution, the UN constitution, and also within Europe, that everyone has an equal right. And we are a public funding body for development and productions of film. And I want to be clear that when we are working with inclusion, we are only looking on who gets to do and develop films, because we believe in every filmmaker's right to their own artistic freedom. And we believe that anyone should be able to tell whatever story that they want. So if you're a woman, you can tell a story about a woman, but you could also tell a story about a man. White men has always had that privilege. And it's like you say, if you can see it, you can be it. And that's very important to have that representation on screen. And the only way to reach that, in our opinion, is to make sure you have diversity behind the camera. In Sweden, how have we been working with this? I was the CEO for 10 years, between 2011 and 2021. And I treated it as any other change management. We have been discriminating different groups of people all the time, and I think it's very important that we acknowledge that. So my intention was to understand where are we now. As you do in change management, you decide, do we have a problem? And what is our vision? What is our goal? Where do we want to be? And when I started, we could see that we had been funding only 26% women almost everyone white. And in Sweden, at the same time, we were complained about our poor quality of the films. And I worked with an organization, and we believe that those two issues, not enough women or people of color, and the poor quality were connected. We believe that if we take the whole talent base, we would reach higher quality, and we would probably get away from stereotypization and all these things that you were talking about, Ms. Diallo, about people performing, being archetypes for certain roles instead of being able to be individuals. So believing that if we take the whole talent base into consideration, Swedish film would be reaching higher quality, and more diversity would be seen on screen. So we made a clear goal that in 4 years' time, reach 50-50 over that 4-year period. And we started off by actually defining what we mean with quality. Quality is very much a subjective way of speaking about film, and every kind of quality actually. We talk a lot about gut feelings, but we should be aware of that the bias and the discrimination comes from gut feelings. So we need to raise above the gut feelings. So we invented or implemented 3 quality criteria. The films that we wanted to support should be able to reach an urgency or relevance for more people than just the filmmaker, show an originality of some kind. It hasn't got to be very artistic, but some kind of new material. And we wanted it to show craft. We wanted professional filmmakers to get our money. We, as I started off, we used change management. You have SWOT. We were very poor in reaching out from white men. We knew where we want to go. Our strategy to reach the goal was actually to start doing and stop talking. We've been talking about discrimination for decades, almost centuries. And we need to start doing things to try to change. So our strategy was to meet every argument that explains why there were so few women, for instance, and meet that argument with an action. So for instance, when it's a very common argument that there aren't any good women out there. There aren't any competent women. So we started off a site, NordicWomeninFilm.com. We have a special intersectional area on the site for racialized women. So women, anyone who says there aren't any women should be overproved that yes, there are. You just have to visit our site. And so we made them role models. We started spreading knowledge a lot to go from opinions to facts. So we make a yearly report. The last report we made is called Which Women? And that's an intersectional quality report with deep interviews with women that are older than the average ageism, which is unfortunately around 35, and women of color. How have they perceived how it is working in the industry? And that is to know where we need to change. And probably most importantly, we count every decision making we do. We count to make sure that we are funding equally between the sexes. And if you are a non-binary person, you are not in the 100%. So this is only between men and women. And then if you are non-binary, you are outside of that scope. And that means that we can be proactive. We count every month, and when we come to April and see that we still have been funding too few women, we can start doing actions to reach out to more women, or to make the production companies reach out to more women. We could see very fast when we, as representing the money, were clear in that we wanted to see more diversity. The production companies also found more diversity because they wanted the money, and money talks. So that was very important that we were clear in our communication, that we had a clear goal. We also could see that when more women got to do films, we actually reached out more. We were invited to more festivals. We received more prizes. And it was a lot of women as well. So now 50-50 of all prizes we win are won by women and 50% by men. So it shows that you can actually make progress if you are very clear. And we can also see that when we start working with this, what's on screen has changed without us interfering with the content. So that's what we have done in short. There are a lot of arguments that people believe that we indirectly interfere with the content anyways by being so clear, and I'm happy to talk more about that when we have our further discussions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Anna Serner. And I was thinking that, I mean, you've been working so hard with this and measuring quality, measuring the results and so on, but you have also been very criticized by those that don't really agree that you should work with inclusion and diversity. And they've been blaming you for what they blame journalists and many of us for being activists and not CEOs or not journalists and so on. And by using the word activist, it's meant to make it sound very, very, suspicious somehow, and that you're not competent enough, or if you have like an agenda. Would you say something about the criticism and the reactions you received during this decade?
Well, I think that the work has been very helpful because when we've been so clear, also by the Me Too movement and Black Lives Matter movement. We invented the tagline 50-50 by 2020 in 2016. And when there was this global movement, it gave us actually quite a lot of help, because the criticism comes always from the ones that feel threatened. And outside Sweden, people don't feel threatened by me or our organization. But within Sweden, there is a big competition for our money. So the ones that fear that the change will make it harder for them to get the money, they will use very hard arguments against me. And one has been, of course, that I've been an activist. And that is to imply that I am stepping out of my formal role as a representative of a government. While, as Kajsa Levin already told us, we all have the assignment to work for human rights. That's within our constitution. So, and we have it as a very clear assignment. And the other criticism has been that when we work so openly, the applicants feel indirectly demanded to make films that fit into our tick box. And we don't have any tick box, but it's saying that we are interfering with the freedom of art is a very hard argument. And there are a lot of, it's very easy to go with that discourse instead of seeing the bigger picture, that this is something that not only public funders needs to achieve human rights in a democracy, also actually the applicants need to do that.
Yeah, what they accuse many institutions of is to working and promoting identity politics, as they call it, instead of artistic quality. We will discuss that more later. Thank you so much, Anna Särner. And last but not least, Zan Belenyuk, he is a member of the Verkhovna Rada. He's an Olympic gold medalist and a lawmaker. Wow. Welcome, Zan. Are you with us?
Yes, I'm here.
We're so happy to have you here.
Yes, yes. Do you hear me?
Yes, we hear you. Thank you so much.
My English not so good, but I try do my best.
We understand you, we do. Thank you.
Yes. So first, I would like to thank the organized for inviting me to speak at this important gathering. I am convinced that the issues of racial discrimination and intolerance in Europe and present and necessitate discussion for develop appropriate solution. As for Ukraine, I cannot say that racism is systemic. According to the data of the Verkhovna Rada Commissioner for Human Rights, cases of discrimination on the ground of ethnic origin in Ukraine are infrequent. In 2019, the Ombudsman Office received 30 such reports, 7% of all reports of discrimination. In 2020, 31 such reports were recorded. However, it is also no secret that at the household level, people with dark skin can face manifestation of racism. Personally, I have faced discrimination many times in my life. This was at the time when I was just taking the first steps of my future victories in sport. No one knew me. I rode on the public transport, and I likelihood of meeting radical and prejudice people in some places was very high. For this reason, I tried to avoid such spaces. In the past, I could not go near football arenas or fun sectors because I knew that for me personally, these areas carried increased danger. For a long time, I trained in the same gym as a radically inclined guy. He was 8 years older than me, and he never called me anything other than monkey. I am glad that I managed to overcome all obstacles in my way, and I, spite of everything, realized my main dream to become an Olympic champion. However, I am sure that the situation in Ukraine is getting better than it was 10-15 years ago. I am confident there are many people in Ukraine and in the world in general who perceive people with dark skin without prejudice. It is important to distinguish between manifestation of ignorance, where a person simply doesn't know how to treat people with different skin color, and situation where ignorance meets violence and the sense of superiority, where aggressive people, because of their beliefs, think that they are better than people with a different skin color. From time to time, I'm asked if I have ambition to become a spokesman for the fight against racism in Ukraine, asks the first Black member of Verkhovna Rada. In my opinion, there is not urgent need for this yet. I hope that my example has a positive effect on the perception of people of different races and shows that Ukrainians can differ. I am convinced that the fight against racism should be a collective effort, and such events as this one should happen more frequently. And we should work systematically to find a solution to this problem. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Zan. This was very, very interesting, and I think all of us understood your point. I would just like to ask you about the difference, because you are a politician, you're a member of parliament, and the first Black member of parliament, and you've been a gold medalist. I mean, you're such a contribution to that country, but would you like to say something about the difference, how you were treated, described in media, being an athlete and being a politician?
I understand your question, but for me it's difficult to give you answer. Yeah, because my English not a good level.
Okay. So it's not enough. What was it? Was it easier to be an athlete than it is to be
no.
a...
Okay, I understand. In sports, I am 21 years. But in political, I'm 2 years. That's why I have a huge background in sports, and that's why I feel myself better there.
Yes.
But my dream come true when I win Olympic Games. Now I can concentrate all my time, all my power in politics. That's why I try do my best here.
Yes. Yes. Thank you. You're participating, and what we're doing now, in fact, is we have this open discussion, and all of you are, of course, welcome to ask your questions and so on. We have Penelope and George, that is Giorgio, sorry, that is taking your questions, and I already have so I already have Marina Bardina, who's a Ukrainian member of parliament. Marina, can you hear us?
Take a word. Oh, it's okay. It's working now. So I'm very happy that we have today discussion on such important topic. And we are usually focusing over the topic of diversity in Ukraine and try to advocate this principle everywhere in art, sports, politics, etc. I also want to note that in Ukraine, there are no such cultural traditions as blackface or black Pete, but of course, in our society, there are also manifestations of racial intolerance. Acts of violations of equality of citizens are criminalized in Ukraine. However, today in our parliament, we are discussing the issue that hate speech and certain manifestations of discrimination should also be recognized as an administrative offense. After all, this will greatly simplify the process of bringing offenders to justice. And I want to emphasize that my colleague in Parliament, Jean Belenouk, who has had the floor before, is actively involved in the developing not only sport infrastructure, but protecting human rights, especially fighting against racism also, because he personally experienced both. And this is important case, how people in Ukraine are becoming politically active, continue to represent their values in different decision-making processes. And today with Mr. Belenouk, we are looking for possibilities to organize information campaigns in Ukraine to support ideas of tolerance. And at the same time, I want to mention that our society is becoming more tolerant every year, and more well-known, public people try to communicate from different fields, media, arts, try to communicate, to speak public about discrimination, and raise this issue among the society. So we continue to communicate diversity as our advantage, and I'm really thankful that in PACE we have such meetings, such events, such communications, and really thanks that Mr. Belenouk is able to join us and just shared his experience. Thank you to everyone.
Yes, thank you for sharing your experience. But I'm wondering, I mean, everything sounds so good right now, listening to you in Ukraine, and everything is just getting better. And I'm so happy to hear that. But, you know, in many European countries and in Sweden and in my country of origin, in Greece, you have powerful politicians, you have members of parliament expressing, calling people garbage, calling people names, and demonizing, voting, stigmatizing people in public, in social media and so on. So we don't only have anonymous keyboard warriors being also racism, xenophobia, anti-Semitism, Islamophobia expressed in the parliament. So I wonder, is that something that you recognize in Ukraine too?
Actually, what is the most important and mentioned is that with every year we become more yeah, now it's better, that we become more and more tolerant and pay special attention to the issues of discrimination. And that is important to mention is that well-known public people help us to stay against discrimination. There are very many public campaigns how to avoid xenophobia, etc. Yeah, we're now paying much attention to the rights of LGBT communities, for example, because we all just have the same experience, I suppose. But with our legislation, with our information campaigns, every year it is just easier to overcome such cases, such issues. And this case of Jean Belenouk in Ukrainian Parliament is also like a sign how we are going to overcome the issue of discrimination.
Yeah, but he's the only one being black in the parliament.
And the first one, yeah.
Let's hope that is a beginning for diversity. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I have many people asking to participate in this discussion, and it's great. And I would like to ask Rokhaya Diallo, my colleague from France. Thank you so much for giving us this very structured stereotypes that are flourishing not only in France, and I should also tell all of you participating now that we have the link to Ms. Diallo's documentary in a message, so you can watch it on Vimeo, I think. So what would you say? What is the best way of getting, of dismantling these stereotypes, of telling new stories, authentic stories, of creating different kinds of characters and archetypes than these ones we have? Because I mean, there is a consciousness, there is an awareness, but still I mean, if you watch Swedish TV or TV series on Netflix or whatever, the brown and the black people and the people of color and the migrants, people like me, we're mostly seen as criminals. And I had this discussion with friends of mine that are actors yesterday, telling that white people write all these gangster stories and they have to play these roles. And so I wonder, what can we do?
Merci beaucoup pour cette question. C'est une vraie question parce que il y a cette question pour les artistes, en fait, il y a vraiment cette pression qu'il y a entre le besoin de travailler, l'urgence de vraiment faire ce qu'ils doivent faire en tant qu'acteurs et en même temps le refus des stéréotypes. Et c'est vrai que parfois ils n'ont pas le choix. C'est un des acteurs que j'avais interviewé m'a dit ses premiers rôles, il était sans papier, donc immigré clandestin. Ensuite, il était dealer et ensuite il était gérant d'une boîte de nuit antillaise. Donc c'était vraiment c'était vigile d'une boîte de nuit antillaise. Donc c'est vrai que c'est difficile parce qu'en fait ils ont quand même besoin de tout simplement de travailler parce qu'ils ont besoin de revenus. Et je pense que une des réponses, c'est vraiment de permettre à tout le monde d'écrire des histoires. Parce que le problème, c'est que les fonds qui sont distribués, qui sont alloués pour faire des films, sont souvent alloués aux mêmes structures de production et aux mêmes personnes qui racontent les mêmes histoires. Là, par exemple, j'ai une chaîne publique qui m'a demandé de faire un documentaire, le dernier documentaire que j'ai réalisé, qui vient d'être diffusé à la télé, qui est concentré sur le mythe de la Parisienne. Parce que la Parisienne, en fait, la femme parisienne, c'est presque une marque qui sert à vendre des parfums, du maquillage, etc. Mais quand vous pensez à la Parisienne, vous ne pensez pas à moi. Et pourtant, je suis née à Paris, dans le centre de Paris, etc. Et donc, moi, je voulais montrer que la femme parisienne, ça pouvait être une femme asiatique, ça pouvait être une femme handicapée, ça pouvait être une femme lesbienne, une femme boxeuse, une femme âgée aussi, parce qu'il y a vraiment cette question d'être jeune tout le temps, une femme grosse. Et donc, j'ai interviewé des femmes, justement, qui étaient contre qui ne ressemblaient pas à ce stéréotype. Et quand on m'a proposé de faire ce film, en fait, moi, j'ai choisi ma boîte de production. Et je suis allée auprès d'une société de production qui s'appelle De l'autre côté du périphérique, de l'autre côté du périph. Donc, en fait, c'est une boîte, c'est compliqué quand on n'est pas français, mais le périphérique, c'est l'espèce de frontière qu'il y a autour de Paris, qui délimite Paris et sa banlieue. Et souvent, la banlieue, notamment dans le nord et dans l'est, ce sont les quartiers les plus pauvres de la région parisienne. Et donc, cette femme qui a fondé sa boîte de production, elle l'a basée en banlieue. Et moi, j'ai choisi de travailler avec elle parce que je savais qu'elle ferait en sorte que c'était une femme qui était engagée dans ces représentations-là. Et je pense que c'est important pour les producteurs, pour les diffuseurs, etc., de solliciter des nouvelles voix qui vont pouvoir concevoir des nouveaux regards. Et vous avez cité l'exemple de Netflix. Je trouve que c'est un exemple très intéressant parce que la série française qui a eu le plus de succès sur Netflix, c'est Lupin, que vous avez peut-être vu.
Ça.
Et Lupin, c'est l'héritage de Arsène Lupin, qui est vraiment une figure de la littérature française très connue, qui était un homme blanc, tout à fait classique. Et en fait, celui qui s'inspire de Lupin, c'est justement cet homme qui s'appelle Hassan, qui est incarné par Omar Sy. Et finalement, son image a circulé à travers le monde parce que Netflix a donné la possibilité à cette série d'exister. Et je trouve qu'une fois que cette série existe sur Netflix, ça donne un message aux chaînes françaises, de leur dire, en fait, si vous mettez un noir comme héros, ça marche. Ça marche même au fin fond des États-Unis où les gens ne regardent jamais de séries françaises. Et j'ai l'impression que ce qui se passe avec même si évidemment on peut se poser des questions sur le capitalisme, sur le commerce, le marketing, etc. Mais ce qui se passe avec Netflix, ce qui se passe avec les Marvel, par exemple, le dernier Marvel qui a très bien marché, c'est Shang-Chi, donc qui est le premier super-héros Marvel asiatique. Qui est tourné partiellement d'ailleurs en mandarin, et je trouve que ça permet déjà aux enfants de grandir avec des représentations diverses, et ça oblige en fait les chaînes à se dire, on peut plus utiliser l'argument de quand on met un noir, quand on met un asiatique, ça ne marche pas, parce que c'est pas vrai en fait. Et je crois vraiment qu'il faut qu'on mette la pression sur le fait que ça a des résultats et qu'on peut raconter de belles histoires en fait avec des personnes non blanches.
Merci beaucoup pour ça. Now we have a question here at the floor. Can I see? The name is Petra Bayer. Petra?
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you.
I would like to raise a quite personal concern I have, which is not so much linked to art, but maybe much more to media perception. And I would like to address you, Mrs. Diallo, and you as well, Fatih. More than 18 years ago, I founded the Austrian platform combating female genital mutilation, Stop FGM. And It's the idea is to connect organizations, to create synergies. And of course, if, for instance, we try to make awareness raising within communities, we ask women from the respective communities to do so, and we offer them training and even funding if they need to. And from the very beginning, we also had a debate how to act and how to raise awareness within the Austrian society without being ethnocentristic, without giving the impression that we know how human rights work, but you still have to learn how to protect your girls and women, of course. So we really tried to avoid it, and we had debates for 18 years about that, how to make that and how to find an approach that is appropriate. And whenever media come to us and ask for interview partners who are affected from FGM, we do not at all say that we offer women because we do not want to to make them more aliens as they often already are, yeah, not only being black but also being cutted, mutilated, wow, yeah. So we really try to avoid it very, very clearly, but nevertheless there is a concern that we might not be the right ones to do that. And I just wonder, is it okay that I, as a white woman with no personal contact to FGM ever in the history of my family and whatever, that I take care about issues like that? Or would you recommend me to leave it?
Thank you so much. Thank you for that question. Ms. Diallo, maybe you could answer that briefly.
Merci beaucoup. C'est une question très, très importante parce que c'est vrai que l'excision, enfin les mutilations génitales sont des questions d'ampleur. Et c'est vrai que souvent, on a eu l'impression que, comment dire, moi je sais que j'avais vu par exemple une vidéo qui m'avait beaucoup gênée, où on voyait en fait des femmes qui étaient victimes de mutilations génitales, qui racontaient un petit peu ce qu'elles avaient vécu. Et en fait, à côté de ça, donc c'était des femmes noires majoritairement. Et à côté de ça, on voyait des personnes blanches en fait expertes qui expliquaient un petit peu, voilà. Pourquoi c'était pas bien, etc., etc. Et ça, c'est vrai que c'est ce que vous avez évité de faire dans votre organisation. Moi, je pense pas qu'il y a des sujets qui soient réservés à certains groupes. Ce que je pense, en revanche, c'est que les personnes qui sont affectées par un mal doivent être celles qui sont en première ligne. C'est-à-dire que c'est être un allié, ça veut dire être à côté et donc, comment dire, se conformer à ce que les personnes qui subissent une oppression veulent faire. Et donc pas leur dicter ce qu'elles doivent faire, mais être à leur écoute et se positionner à un endroit où ça les aide. Et je pense que vous, à la position où vous êtes, vous avez peut-être des accès que d'autres n'ont pas et que ces accès-là doivent être peut-être ouverts par le pouvoir que vous avez de les ouvrir. Et vraiment, je pense que c'est important que les personnes concernées prennent la parole en premier lieu et qu'on ne donne pas l'impression que, effectivement, comme vous l'avez dit, mais vous avez l'air quand même assez vigilante par rapport à ça, qu'elles sont d'une culture arriérée et qu'en gros, l'Occident va leur apprendre un petit peu la vie. C'est toujours ça qui est un petit peu compliqué. Mais je pense que si vous avez cette conscience-là et que si ces personnes-là, en fait, décident de la manière dont elles vont sensibiliser les autres personnes qui ont subi des choses, on est dans une bonne démarche. Mais je pense que vraiment, si vous êtes solidaire, c'est déjà une très bonne chose.
So solidarity and no reserved positions and no exclusion, in fact. I mean, okay. Thank you so much. I would like to invite Mr. Jallo, please.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Alexandra. I just have two questions. One of them, the first one goes to Ms. Kaisa Ravin. It was really very interesting listening to you. You have a very important role because you know, the art is extremely important, and you mentioned the fact that the right to create art without censorship, without free from political interference, is essential for the well-being of society, and according to UNESCO also. I do agree to that, but I wanted to ask you, is there any limit? Because quite often when we talk about art, it's also supposed to be essential for the well-being of society, but the question is for the well-being of whom in society. Now, when you have art that dehumanizes people, art that is basically extremely racist and creates division within society, is that acceptable art? Do we as politicians have a responsibility to make sure that the arts also, when it comes to freedom of expression or having art, it also has a limit? Because with the Council of Europe and the what we say about freedom of expression, we're saying it is extremely essential for any democracy, but there is also a limit to it. That's why we have hate speech. When you go beyond that line where it can be seen as hate speech, then the law would come in. So my question to you, do you think that there is a limit as to what can be considered as art, acceptable art, or is everything acceptable as long as it is called art? I'm saying this because I have a personal experience when somebody drew me as a slave, a runaway slave, and posted it in the city and called it art. Now, that is dehumanizing me, because calling me a slave, calling me the N-word, and call it art and saying it's free and it cannot somehow be interfered with. The law in Sweden did not agree because this person was found guilty in court several times. But the art world, we are saying, no, this is infringing on the freedom of the artists to be able to express themselves. So my question to you, do you think there is a limit? And if you think so, where do you think this limit is? And the second thing is, what is the role of the art, for example? What is the role of culture and art in creating inclusion, creating diversity, and also, emphasizing the respect for human rights? Do you have any role, or that is not something that the art is responsible for or can have a role in? Thank you.
Thank you so much. Kaisa, Ravin. Kaisa, are you with us? Yes, thank you, Kaisa.
It takes some time to be on the floor again. Thank you for very good questions. And I do not think I have all the answers to the questions because they are extremely complex. But in the Swedish constitution, as you know, of course, we have the freedom of expression and freedom of art. The artistic freedom is safeguarded in the constitution. And well, as a cultural bureaucrat, of course, I have to say that what is perceived as art is one thing, and the law and what is conceived as hate speech or defamation is something that our courts have to decide, of course. So but art as such can be anything. It can be good, it can be bad. That's why it's so powerful. And depending on where you are perceiving the art, you also see different values in it, of course, and it's a very strong force. But I would say that the Swedish Arts Council, we fund a lot of art and culture in Sweden, and we fund a lot of NGOs and small art organizations that apply for funding. And we work with the counselors or councils, groups from the art field itself to actually be the ones to judge whether this art, whether this artistic performance is of national interest. And that's what the whole debate in Sweden at the moment is about. What is conceived as artistic quality? As what Anna said, it's also very interesting because, of course, that is that discussion as such has to also define what is artistic quality. And often many, if you look 10, 20, 50 years back, have been hiding away from that. It's not possible to define artistic qualities. And I think you have to have a leadership and you have to dare, whether you're in my shoes as a director general, but also if you are one of the counselors in the groups that are actually assessing the applications that we get from the free art sector, to actually see who is getting funding and who is not. And we have to be bold, but we also have to be clear about who is getting funding and why. And I think we have a job to do. We are not there yet.
But I can hear it's a very delicate balance. It's a very delicate balance between fighting racism, working with inclusion and diversity, and on the other hand, seeing like expressions, artistic expressions like blackface, because we have more than those that Mamadou also mentioned that were, addressing him personally. But we have these kinds, and Islamophobic art or whatever it is. So it's a very delicate to balance between the artistic freedom and also at the same time fighting racism. How do you do that?
Well, as I said, their artistic expression and artists expressing themselves in all kind of ways is one thing. The other thing is getting funding. And a lot of criticism, as what Ms. Anna Serne said before, it's about we are having a lot of power over the art sector because we are funding the art sector. So the discussion is a lot about who is getting funding and who is not getting funding. And I think that is very important to remember. So when we look at projects and we say this is the criteria to get state funding, because state funding is also something that opens doors to other funding systems and funding schemes, we have to be aware of our power. And we are looking through, actually at the moment, we're looking at all our processes and how we actually recruit people to these councils that assess our applications. So that is really important. But then, as Anna said, we have to keep two thoughts in our heads at the same time. So we both have to secure artistic freedom when we assess our applications. That is one process in our authorities' work. And the other one is the role of culture and social inclusion in society. And we have these culture policy goals that we have to strive to achieve. And we are not there yet, because we can see that the Swedish art sector is definitely not, when it comes to public funding, represented by how the Sweden looks today. So we have quite a long way to go, and it's not okay that it takes so long time. So who is getting funded rather than what is getting funds?
So
also important.
Follow the money. Follow the money.
Follow the money always, of course.
Exactly. Thank you so much, Kajsa, for now. Petra Stenen from the room, you ask the floor.
Yes. And thank you, because that's exactly what I wanted to talk about. Follow the money, but also follow the gatekeepers. And I think for us as a committee, it would be really interesting to look into this question: who is giving access to whom? And first of all, before I go into that, I like your reference to Lupin, but I think there's another series on Netflix. I'm doing a report on sexual reproductive health and rights. And I think sex education is just such an amazing example, also about generations. It's not only young people having sex and enjoying it, but also older people having sex and sometimes enjoying it and sometimes not. And it's such an honest, and I was just reading in the Dutch newspaper how two young gay guys talk about how they really got information out of this series as well. Anyway, so I think culture can really open eyes. And I know that you're involved, that you were interviewed by my friends from Dipsaus, which is, I referred to it before, it's a podcast by women of color, for women of color, and anybody else interested. So I think there are lots of initiatives that are taking place in culture that mainstream doesn't know about, but that brings really change. So how to bring these groups together? And so this is my observation that maybe many of the panelists can react on: the role of the gatekeepers. I will give a personal example. I'm the chair of the board of a modern art museum. And we did a benchmark on the remuneration for board members. And it's a volunteer job. I spend about 10 to 15 days per year, and I have other income, so I can do it. But for young people or people who don't have the privileges I have, it's impossible to be on that board. So I was thinking maybe we can look into board structures of cultural institutions and how to encourage to do this in a different way.
And yes,
And
exactly.
I also, one last question, and I also look at us here, and Petra and I, maybe as a bureau of the committee, I love this conversation, but I feel that we should have this conversation also with people from the political committee and the legal committee and the social and cultural affairs committee.
Yes.
Because I think we more or less agree with each other here. But how
Yes.
can we expand what we learned together in these other committees in our own Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe?
Yes, and it really is. I totally agree with you, because participating in this discussion, and that's why I said that I feel so privileged and honored to be part of this. It feels somehow like a safe room where you can share your thoughts and ideas and so on. But I mean, you only need to switch to Twitter and just write something that should be given in Europe 2021, like. Oh, democracy, we should fight for democracy or human rights, or all men were created equal or something, and you just wait for the reactions and the hatred that comes up. So they're like, the polarization in big parts of Europe, I would say, is like so deep right now, and is also growing, and the gaps are growing. So I would also like to see to be there with you, but also to hear more people and how we can work on that and fight discrimination and racism that has been so normalized. I would like to invite Miss Åberg from the Swedish delegate, please. The floor is yours.
Sorry. I have a question to Jean Belenuk and Maria Bardina. Recently, the Ukrainian parliament passed a law stating that anti-Semitism and manifestation of it are banned, but the law doesn't stipulate punishment for those found guilty of violating the law. So could you please, dear colleagues from the Ukrainian parliament, comment that? Thank you.
Thank you so much. Marina, would you like to elaborate on that, answer that question? I mean, I was thinking because Zan maybe, his English maybe is not really enough.
So yeah, I want to say that this law is one of the first in a topic of our work against discrimination, because to tell the truth, we are not like widely notice such problems. I mean, no such many people go to police and just say that they have such discriminations or problems. No, sometimes these public discussions, they are raised by propaganda from the Russian Federation, for example, in our side, because of war and different relations between Russia and Ukraine. But to tell the truth, we do not experience this problem very widely. To tell that we need appropriate legislation or public discussions, etc. But still, step by step, we make some decisions to make our input in human rights protection field. I mean.
Was that sorry? Was it Åberg, Miss Åberg, that asked the question?
Yes, it was, but I'm quite curious because historically Ukraine had a lot of problems just with anti-Semitism, and we know that there are some parties very against human rights and very anti-Semitic in their rhetorics, and you're saying that you don't have these problems in the society. So I just wonder, is it so that legislators are not aware of the problems, or just you were so successful in fighting anti-Semitism the last 10 years or 20 years. Thank you.
Yeah, exactly. Because sometimes, you know, it sounds like some kind of a defense or denial. What would you like to say? Please, very briefly, something about that.
I want to briefly mention that my colleague is exactly right, talking about Ukrainian history and problems we had with, but it's not so actual for contemporary Ukraine, to tell the truth, because we have history. We have Babin Yar, the project which is dedicated to the problems of anti-Semitism in Ukraine, but you are right that it's all about our history. Contemporary Ukraine is a little bit another, and I really invite you to come and see these projects, and see how things are going now in dimension of anti-Semitism.
Yeah, we have some Swedish Nazis that moved to Ukraine that are sending me threats, telling me that they live there now. I would really like to visit and learn more about that. But thank you so much. You know, we're soon running out of time, and I would like to ask this panel that we have today about like more specific ideas and suggestions, and what's the next step? Where do we go from here? How can we act? How can we be the best allies? And how can we use this European platform somehow and cooperate in order to achieve diversity, inclusion, and so on? So, I mean, maybe you have a toolbox that you would like to share. And Anna Sarner, you were very, very specific already in your introduction, but I would like to hear more of you. So please feel free to share, I mean, what the takeaways from this conversation would be. Would you like to start, Anna Sarner?
Thank you, and so many interesting topics. And I just want to add on to the anti-Semitism. I think that we all should be aware all around the world that anti-Semitism exists and discrimination exists. And I think we all need to acknowledge that we are living in societies that have these problems. So we should be very open to see them and try to avoid them. And I think that we have come much further now than we were just 10 years ago. And in the film community, this has really been proven by the Swedish and the Netherlands Film Fund. We cooperated, decided to do something actively. As I said, stop, talk, start to act. So we just decided that we should create an international film fund for voices that have been and still are discriminated and have a long way to the money. It could be of class reasons, it could be of geographical reasons, and of course gender, ethnicity, skin color, LGBTQ.
Is age also a criteria?
Yes. Any of the discrimination grounds in the UN Declarations of Rights. So, and that age comes with that. So, and it was very interesting because we decided that we go together, we create the fund. Our goal was to find 10 countries that would participate and to be open for these minority groups, minority in terms of getting money. And we made phone calls specifically, personally, to the CEOs that we found possible to say yes. And it took us only one phone call, and we are already 10 countries, 2-3 more countries that are considering joining. And the aim is really to openly show that in the European, and Canada is actually very interested, so maybe European Canadian industry are aware that we have been discriminating a lot of voices. We want to clearly signal that if we don't work with that, we will lose perspectives and lose quality, and we will lose the empathy between people within our democracies. So we hope we will launch this fund first part of next year. We already told about it at the Cannes Film Festival, but I think this is very encouraging that 10 countries in a moment of one phone call could agree on something that I know for sure just 5 years ago would have been seen as impossible. We can't do this, we can't do that. But now people really are aware that we need to work. So I would just suggest that anyone that wants to make change, make an action and reach out to your neighboring country, but make a clear action that shows that you are aware of the complexity and that you are the imperfectionality within our systems. And if everyone is doing only one action, I think that would make huge progress. And I just encourage anyone to do that. We all have power sitting around these tables. So let's use it in a good way.
Thank you so much. I always feel very optimistic when I hear you, and I'm very sad you're leaving as a CEO, or you're already left. And let's hope that the next CEO will have the same dedication and determination as you had during these years. But I also wonder if media, I mean, you're talking about the film industry and so on, and I think there's now raising awareness, but I wonder about media that also have a huge impact on the impressions about the others, whoever they are. Thank you so much, Anna Sarner, for your contribution and your work. And so the call to action, let's hear you, Zan. Could you say something, Zambeleniuk? Any advice, any insights, anything you would like to ask for? Some kind of a call to action?
Zan, you have to ask for the floor if you want to take the floor.
Okay, maybe we can go to Kajsa Ravin instead, because I know you are there, Kajsa. And we can get back to Zan after Kajsa.
Yes, thank you very much. I would briefly say that most important for me to take action is to try to internationalize the debate in Sweden, so it's not a Swedish debate about Sweden. That becomes not interesting enough. So we need to flip the discussion and understand other perspectives. And we do that with two very concrete actions. And one is we are having a pilot at the moment that is funded by SIDA, the Swedish International Development Cooperation Agency, to work with artistic freedom globally. And we're a small country, and this is a pilot project, but we are working to try to understand how we can develop artistic freedom in a global sense. And then we are also hosting, hopefully if the pandemic is not challenging it too much, but we are hosting the World Summit for IFACA, International Federation of Arts Councils and Arts Agencies. So top management in culture policy will come to Stockholm late spring next year to discuss artistic freedom in an international perspective, where of course issues of social inclusion is at heart of that discussion. So it's two important actions that we take to internationalize our debate and not to be only Swedish from a Swedish perspective. So that's important for us. Yeah,
extremely important. Not to be in the bubble, and it is for all of us. wherever we live and whatever we do. Thank you so much, Kaiser Ravin. Zan Belenyuk, are you with us?
No, I don't think so. So we can just move on to the next.
Okay. So finally, I would like to ask Rokhaya Diallo if you could help us with your call to action or the takeaways from today's discussion. What is it?
Merci beaucoup. Je crois qu'il y a beaucoup de choses à penser aussi en dehors des espaces nationaux. Je pense que ici, aujourd'hui, c'est l'occasion aussi de penser comment collectivement, dans l'espace européen, on peut essayer de mettre en œuvre des actions qui dépasseront justement l'impact uniquement national. Je crois que nous, en tout cas, qui créons en fait des œuvres audiovisuelles devons vraiment mettre en œuvre en fait les principes que nous édictons et faire en sorte que les équipes que nous composons quand nous faisons des films, quand nous les écrivons, quand nous les produisons, soient conformes à ce que nous défendons devant les micros. Donc moi, c'est vrai que par exemple pour mon dernier film, comme je parlais de femmes, j'ai fait en sorte de m'entourer d'une majorité de femmes pour filmer, pour prendre le son, pour produire, etc., etc. Et je pense que c'est comme ça aussi qu'on peut promouvoir des talents qui sont peut-être sous-estimés et leur permettre justement de faire carrière en travaillant. Donc je crois qu'il faut aussi, au-delà des incantations un petit peu théoriques, essayer de mettre en œuvre concrètement tout ce qu'on peut dire quand on est face à un micro.
Merci beaucoup pour ça. Okay, I don't think we have time for any other interventions. I would just like to thank you all, and especially Mr. Mamadou Malcolm Jallow and all of you for all these sessions. I've been listening to you the whole day, and I really hope that we can all meet again in, not like this, sitting at home alone, but meeting in real life. Thank you so much, and good luck with everything. Over to you.
Thank you immensely, Alexander, for that really amazing moderation of the last but very important panel. So thank you so much. Ladies and gentlemen, it's been a long day, but a very interesting day. Let me just take this opportunity to thank, first of all, our chair, the chair of the Equality Committee, Petra Bayer, for your leadership and your support. Let me take this opportunity to thank the head of my delegation, the Swedish delegation, for all the support that we have received. Boriana, it's really absolutely appreciated. You should know. Let me also take this opportunity to thank all the speakers in the panels. I cannot name you all, but you know yourself, and it has been a really amazing day with such interesting observations and contributions. So I want to thank you really for all that you have given us today, food for thought for us to take away. And I can assure you all the information that came in and recommendations would be made to use at the Committee on Non-Discrimination. We have in our conversation highlighted a lot of things, but among other things, the danger of the increasingly intolerant, xenophobic and racist rhetoric in the political discourse of some Council of Europe member states. It is worrying that such rhetoric, once used only by populist and radical right-wing forces, is now spreading across the political spectrum and becoming increasingly normalized. The internet has significantly contributed to spreading, amplifying, and trivializing hate speech. We know this, we see this, we experience this in most cases. We have also emphasized the need to adopt an intersectional approach in identifying discrimination and in designing and enforcing measures to address it. It's extremely important that we have the intersectional approach in all the aspects that we have a look at this phenomenon that we're facing today. We have underlined that the cultural sector, including the press, cinema, television, as well as online media, and in particular social networks, have an important role to play in countering ethnic bias. We spoke just the last panel, we talked about how important it is to use the resources that we have also in making sure that those resources will contribute in promoting democracy, in promoting diversity and inclusion, and that is extremely important. A very important point that we as politicians, as policymakers should take with us from the conversation today also is that the fact that politicians, including legislators and policy makers, we have a political and moral obligation to refrain from hate speech and stigmatization language, and to condemn immediately and unequivocally its use. We cannot be the ones that would normalize racism and hate speech, because people look up to us, and it's important that we lead by example. We must renew our commitment to cooperate closely in these areas with relevant bodies within national parliaments and the European Parliament, as well as with civil society organizations. For me personally, that comes from a civil society movement. My entire life I've been active in civil society. It is extremely important to make sure that civil society take an active role, that we make sure that whatever decisions we made, even at national level, that those decisions would be bottom up. We have a conversation with civil society. We know what is happening. We know what they need, and then we base our decisions on that. So consultation with civil society is extremely important, and we need to emphasize and prioritize that. ECRI and EU, for example, I'm very happy that they reiterate their support for the Charter of European Political Parties for a non-racist society, and welcomes initiatives to revise it and increase its implementation. This is something that I really appreciate, and this is something that I'm working on, and hopefully, we'll be able to have a revised version as soon as possible. So let me, on behalf of the No Hate Parliamentary Assembly, the Committee on Equality and Non-Discrimination, and the Council of Europe Parliamentary Assembly, the Swedish Parliament, thank you all, really. Again, civil society organizations that joined us today, really appreciate that. The institutions and individuals that contributed to the added value of the present conference and the proposals that you and the recommendations that you gave us, I can assure you that we take them into account in our Parliamentary Assembly and in the Committee on Equality and Non-Discrimination. These are very important recommendations that we'll make good use of. Some of them, we mentioned a lot of suggestions that I think are worth mentioning. We talked about intersections of systems. I think that for me is extremely important to look at the systems of oppression and how they intersect. We talked about, the Speaker of the Swedish Parliament in his opening speech mentioned looking at having a human rights centered approach. I think is extremely important. Also having a comprehensive and holistic approach when we're looking at these issues. Creating an agenda for deepening democracy, not to see racism as its own particular issue, but to connect it to democracy, because that's what it is about. So when we look at how we need to fight against racism, it's important to look at how we can create an agenda for improving and deepening democracy. We talked about representation and visibility as a very important aspect. We talked about political participation and representation even within decision-making institutions like the parliament that we're sitting in, the Parliamentary Assembly, or our national parliament. The role of civil society, as I mentioned, the need for stronger anti-discrimination legislation with strong and clear language, celebrating diversity within diversity, building allies and coalitions. So you can go on and go on when it comes to some of the great recommendations that you mentioned throughout this day, and we're going to take stock of this and make sure we make use of it. So let me assure you that the Parliamentary Assembly will further develop step up its actions in these areas, which are fully in line with the Council of Europe's vocation to foster peace and unity amongst its members, and that in doing so, it will support the work of relevant bodies within the Council of Europe, including the European Commission Against Racism and Intolerance, ECRI, and the Steering Committee on Anti-Discrimination, Diversity, and Inclusion. Only when we are ready to acknowledge the existence of structures and institutions that are rooted in our colonial past and our history can we begin to address the pain, trauma, and discrimination that different vulnerable groups are subjected to today. To do this, we must secure strong participatory processes of civil society in policy design and decision-making for any policy against racism affecting them. We cannot make policies about the people without having them included in the process. It's extremely important. So as the General Rapporteur on combating racism, I welcome the valuable contributions from all our guests, both in the respective panels, but also during the open discussions. Those of you that are here physically and those that joined us remotely, I really want to thank you for taking your time to join us. Thank you for bringing this very important issue at the highest political space but also for your commitment to address this very hateful ideology. Let me also take this opportunity, and this is one of the most important things, and I really want to emphasize that it is important. Let me also take this opportunity to thank the staff of the Secretariat, both in the Council of Europe and the Swedish delegation staff, for the tireless efforts in making it possible for all of us to be part of this great conference. It would not have been possible without your efforts, and I want to emphasize that you've been working with this for the past 2 years and doing everything possible to make this happen. And I really want to thank you, and I think you are worth an applause for all the efforts that you. Finally, it is said that when privilege becomes the norm, equality feels like an oppression. When privilege becomes the norm, whenever we talk about equality, those that are privileged feel is oppression, because they're afraid of losing their privilege. And at the same time, when we choose to be silent in the face of bigotry, we create division rather than unity, and ultimately we undermine the basic values of democracy, human rights, and the rule of law. We must act quickly, firmly, and collectively, not to lose ground in the fight against racism and intolerance. And I'm confident that when we renew our commitment and pool our efforts together and take collective action, we shall overcome. But let me remind you that our success in our fight against racism is judged not only by the eloquence of our words, but by the degree to which they are put in action. So thank you so much for this wonderful time and this day and this conference. Thank you.
Thank you, Mamadou.
Yes, we can't leave without thanking the interpreters. They've been doing an amazing job. I don't speak French, so we have French speakers here. So if it wasn't for you, I would not be able to understand anything. So thank you so much, really, for providing us this very valuable service that you provide for us. So thank you. Really appreciate it.